2, 1. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're safe and sound and warm. We're here at Town Hall to start the December 17, 2019 Board of Selectmen meeting, which I would like to call to order. I am going to hold off on approval of the minutes. I had a couple little things that I wasn't able to get to Heidi in time, so I promise that we will do those right after the new year. Turning now to public comment for items not on the agenda this evening. Seeing and hearing none, I will move to budgets. And Andrea, please join us at the table. How are you tonight? Yes. See?
I gotta sit on the end.
He's in a regular
Fools in here.
Come on, man, what are you doing? Fooling around with furniture?
I'm good. I'm on the edge.
Well, I think it kind of gets you back, because you just said I needed a pillow, so.
I think I need one
See
too.
the page numbers on these?
I'm sorry, yes, so historic is on page 263.
Yes.
I have 289. All right, 263.
She's got a couple of budgets,
Okay,
right? You're gonna do, which one's you
it's
presenting?
not 289.
Just,
Just the historic preservation?
yeah, just
So
this.
263 apparently.
Okay. All right, take it away.
Okay, just, I think the key things here are that, there are two new requests for funding. One is, $1,200 for, I'm being optimistic, cemetery maintenance. Hopefully CPC will grant us the funds to move forward with the cleanup of the Canterbury Street Cemetery. And so we have anticipated that, and Randy sharpened his pencil and gave us a spring and fall budget.
So Andrea, you don't need anything else from us on the CPC
No.
application, right? They have everything they
No,
need? Okay.
correct, thank you so much. Let's see, and the other thing is, we have, there's a request for $2,000 to annually assess the monuments. And that was Tom's idea, and I think it's a fabulous idea. In front of you, sorry, and maybe I should have waited to pass it out, but I've got just a list of monuments and markers that both the Historical Commission has records of, and also these include Keith's. So that you can see there really are a number of things that we do want to make sure that we monitor and take care of. And so the $2,000, I think, will allow us to do,
Kind of minor repairs.
yeah, exactly, some
So the
small
idea would,
repairs or
there's
cleanup.
Yep, I'm sorry. Yep.
No, it's all right, I'm done.
There's approximately 20 monuments in town. The idea in talking with Keith and Andrea was if this amount would allow us to hire a professional to come in and assess about 4 of them a year, and that way every 5 years, these things are being assessed.
Everybody, yep.
What triggered this is the concept of what happened out front.
Yep.
Where that had gone some, 15 years or so without being properly assessed, the brick memorial out front. And we ended up having a fairly sizable, improvement that had to be done, as opposed to if we had caught that earlier on, we might have been able to get out of it cheaper. That's the idea.
And Keith, I guess Keith's okay with this coming under
Yes.
your budget, Andrea?
I think so. I think, I mean, we work together on a lot of things anyway, so I think this will work nicely for us.
And do you anticipate hiring a third-party vendor for?
If need be, we have used an art conservator, Daedalus, who is based in Watertown, and he has done the Lincoln statue and the Iron Horse, which is not an iron horse, but a bronze horse, for many, many years.
Details, Andrea.
Yeah, I know. So, anyway, he's quite familiar with our markers and monuments in town, and does them periodically as we're able to get the work going and the funding.
Okay. And do you have, do you want to, at this time, take us through the historic preservation slides, or?
Oh, I think it's kind of,
The way I've been asking the department heads to come in and talk with you the way you all just did. In the meantime, I was kind of flipping through her slides for the
Flipping through.
public.
Okay.
yeah. So, just in terms of key initiatives, for this year, we're looking forward to restoring, finally, this will be I think, the final, for the Memorial Bell Tower. And thanks to Michelle's help, that went out for bid, and that, so we do have somebody going to be working on that in the spring.
Is that the $700 increase in the budget?
No, actually, thank you, Joe, that's a good question. No, in fact, last year, the bell tower had a bit of trouble meeting their expenses, and so they did go over last year. A couple of the things we had to do was to repoint some of the lower part of the bell tower, and then also paint the windows on the lower floor. And so the other thing is that they couldn't make their electricity bills. So what we did was, they had an energy audit, and so there are some things that have come out of that I think we'll be taking a look at. But Paul, of course, Paul Henue was instrumental in getting that done for us. So we don't have a plan as to what we're going to do with that information yet, but we will do that after the holidays.
Okay, thank you. I have no other questions.
Mary?
Andrea, last year, there was a warrant article that gave, I'm not sure if it was a warrant article or a change in policy, that gave the Historic Districts Commission a role in reviewing kind of major projects. Do you just want to speak to that for a minute? I believe it came out, and it was implemented this year
Sure.
with respect to the, I believe it was the proposal on Central Street
That
by
is
the
absolutely correct.
Krigsman Yoga. But could you just kind of remind the audience, 'cause that was a policy change, and since you were last here, that was actually implemented.
Yes, it was, and I think quite successfully. I think it worked out. The Historic Districts Commission will be asked to review large projects that are on buildings that are not in historic districts. So, of course, in the historic districts, they do already have jurisdiction, but, so this one on, the proposed on Central Street was one of those. And so, we did have an opportunity to review that and make recommendations to the planning board.
Yep. I would just say that I remember when that came up last year, I had mixed feelings about it. And obviously, town meeting approved it, so our role is to carry it out. I watched with interest. I watched that hearing with interest. And I really thought that the commission, and I know that there was probably a lot of staff work that went on your end before that meeting. I thought that it pretty much worked as was expected. And I thought that what I appreciated in particular was that there was a process, there was kind of a formal checklist with defined criteria that I think not only guided the discussion then, but is going to serve as a blueprint. And I would just extend my appreciation for the way that you and the district implemented that. I would just also say on these markers that every once in a while, the board does get letters from people mentioning that monuments or plaques which are commemorating individuals or important events or people are not being properly cared for. So I would, I appreciate that this is being put forward for budget consideration.
Thank you very much, Mary.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I also think, you know, as Tom pointed out, and you as well, Andrea, sometimes short dollars not only help us be true to our mission to, you know, preserve these monuments, but are also make economic sense for the town, and to not have a program and a schedule in place to do that makes that difficult, and we're reactive and not, you know, not proactive. So I think that will be helpful. I do have some questions on the bell tower that maybe I'll
Oh, sure.
talk with you offline
Okay,
about, just
that's
to
fine.
make sure I
That's fine.
understand all of that. Questions from the public on the historic preservation budget this evening? Anything further? Andrea, anything further on that?
No,
Now, do you
I
have
don't-
other budgets?
I think,
Got
I
it.
do have, the special fund worksheets that are
Yes.
in here, but they're pretty straightforward, I think. So I don't wanna take up your time with that. The Greenbush, on 265 really, primarily talks about all the money that was awarded this year for projects, so.
And remind me, does the district's commission vote on those allocations?
No, that is the Historical Commission.
The historical commission, okay, great.
Andrea, just with respect to that, the beginning budget of 1.3 million, when this was initially established, how much was in the initial fund?
It was it began at 1.35 million.
Okay.
And Jean left, we decided to leave $300,000 available in cash.
Okay.
And then the rest she has invested in.
And so the target is approximately $100,000 a year?
Yes, yes.
Give or
and-
take?
Yeah, so that, the purpose of this was to maintain the Greenbush corridor over many years. And so when we first were able to start granting money, the commission at that time decided to limit it to $100,000 a year.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Any further questions? Andrea, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Information technology, Mr. Becker?
He is on page 30.
Sit right there on the edge.
So if you don't mind, I'll cue this one up. So Steve Becker, our IT director, is here to present his budget. The salary line is recommended at requested at $214,628. The expense line is a little different than what's in your book. It's actually gonna be $261,789, and that difference is because the computer services agreement, we got a new quote for a computer services agreement after we put the book together, and that number, instead of $214,544, should be $219,494, bringing the total expense line to $261,789, and therefore the total departmental request to $476,417.
476,
476,417.
got it.
As you can see on the far right column, we have two additional requests that I'll let Steve speak to
All right.
in general.
Just to go over a little bit, just a summary of the department. So we provide services to all town departments except for the Hingham Light Plant, and that's across 16 municipal locations. We implement and monitor cybersecurity, defenses, web filters, spam filters, endpoint protection, ongoing assessments and mitigation. We're also responsible for the entire telephone system across the town, and is responsible for the websites and the social media accounts. Key initiatives going forward into next year. We're going to be replacing the existing fiber infrastructure, which we have connecting all the buildings together. We're going to be replacing that. We're investigating the upgrade of the data center. We're going to be installing exterior cameras on the town hall. We're also upgrading any remaining Windows 7 machines desktops and laptops to Windows 7, to Windows 10. And we're upgrading and remaining 2008 servers to 2016 servers. We just recently completed the domain controller upgrade for both the town hall network and the library network. Additional requests, $78,000 for a full-time GIS coordinator. Tom and I had discussed this, and currently, right now, GIS was being performed by Lonnie Fournier, the community planning, senior planning, conservation, senior planner. And we're also using an outside consultant for updating data layers, things like that. However, that outside consultant is no longer working for us. He has actually moved on. He's actually working for the town of Cohasset right now. So
He'll miss us.
Currently, we're using GIS for many different things. We're using it for parcel management, building permits. We have a hydrant layer, historical inventory, historic districts, zoning districts, sewer piping infrastructure, watershed areas, well locations, dam locations, just catch basins. DPW uses it for their work order management system. But I don't think it's tapped nearly as much as I think we can tap it. You can use it for so many different planning and asset management tasks. You can use road maintenance. You can determine, if you have it in the database that, certain roads or, certain conditions, certain ages, you can plan and schedule that maintenance across the town. You can create trail maps for all our conservation areas, police patrol districts, plowing, sanding routes to make them more efficient. So it's basically, the GIS system is only limited by somebody's imagination, whoever takes that over, and it can really be an asset to planning and making decisions going forward. Also in my budget, this year included, was $9,360
Yeah.
for GIS consultant. The assessor also has, I believe, $6,000 in their budget for it. And if we were to hire a GIS coordinator, that money could go towards funding that.
So the net request is $63,000.
Exactly.
Okay. I think you're headed to the advisory committee after this. I would kind of make that clear to the advisory committee.
So do you mind if I just jump in and just
No,
kind
go
of
ahead.
augment some of
Yep.
what Steve just presented from the GIS coordinator, and we have the next conversation after this on the IT director overlap. But there are, in your packet, there's two stapled together pieces of information, one from Wellesley, one from Concord. And these are just snapshots from the website, the GIS website pages of those two communities to give you guys a sense of how GIS, when fully committed to by a community, can extend. And by the way, I really want to stress this. Lonnie Fournier is our GIS coordinator. She's also our conservation agent. She does everything I ask her to do when it comes to GIS. She does it very, very well.
Amazing.
Absolutely incredible. Because she's also doing the conservation agent work. We're not giving her additional time in the day to go spend on GIS. She just finds a way to get it done.
Yeah.
She's doing it with state data, very little homegrown data sets. She's doing it with a plotter and a software license. And that's the level of support that we're giving her to do this, that plus the data creation from the outside vendor historically. As Steve said, that person is going away. It seemed like an opportune time to move into a permanent role within the staffing structure. The other thing I would point out is at the very beginning of your books, on Roman numeral 3 and 4, remember that paragraph I spoke to last time? This was one of, in that paragraph, this was discussed as one of the key positions for backfilling, in large part, the responsibilities that historically had been with the engineering department.
Right.
That has now been migrated and rethought across the organization, in large part in the DPW, but elsewhere as well. And then the last piece I would put in, and I'm not sure Steve covered it, I didn't hear it, maybe he did and I missed it, but this was a purposeful effort to put this in Steve's department. I could have put it in the DPW, I could have put it in planning, it could have gone in several different places. I purposely put it in IT because when, this is a technical position, and when a calamity strikes, when there's an emergency from an IT perspective, it's all hands on deck, and you want to have access to your technical staff as easily and readily as possible. I've been through that. I've had that happen to me before when I was in this kind of a role, and I spent 2 weeks putting patches on computers because that's what IT needed, and I had that base background. So I think it's important that the position be there to augment the IT department. Anything I missed that you thought we should?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Joe?
Are you finished? I did.
Well, we still have.
We have the one other additional
addition to-
request.
Yeah, the other additional request, yeah.
The other additional request is for overlapping of a IT director due to the fact that in 2021 I will be retiring.
Purposely
wanted to skip over this.
That's why I went to Joe with questions. I thought maybe we could just move on, yeah.
Exactly.
It would be for a 6-month overlap, and I know, that sounds a little bit lengthy. I just feel that a lot will be depending upon experience in the technologies that we use, as well as municipal experience. And if anything happens within that initial time frame where maybe we have candidates come in and those candidates, maybe we find out that they're not qualified, and then we have to start the process all over again, I think that limits us considerably.
The reason for the 6-month overlap, it sounds excessive, and in theory, it actually may end up seeming that in the process, but the fear is this is, as someone recently said to me, and I don't want to take away the thunder, but most important thing right now the town is doing is probably acquiring the water company. The second most important thing will be replacing this gentleman to my immediate left.
I think I am the author of that
I
comment.
believe you are.
And I
Didn't want to steal your thunder, but it was so appropriate at that moment.
And I was really pushing to make sure we have a 6-month overlap. We read about other communities that are just shut down because of an IT problem, that there's malware that comes in, and towns pay hundreds of thousands or millions to get their data back. This is a key area for the ongoing viability of the town, and I'm just hoping 6 months is enough to make sure that we have overlap, that you can transition your knowledge to whoever succeeds you. We actually have in our back pocket a motion to prevent you from leaving. But
We have a police force for that.
that's right. But I think this is really a key area for, as I said, the ongoing viability of town government. So I'm glad we're pushing in that direction. I can go over some questions.
Part of the reason for the 6 months was we wanted to start the process so that we were ready to make a job offer at the 6-month advance point, because if it falls apart at that point, if we don't get the candidates we want in the first drive, which sometimes happens, we would have to repost. We don't want to time this so that this person's coming in 2 or 3 months in advance,
Right.
and then have that happen.
Right.
Because then we have somebody shadowing him for a couple of weeks, and that just doesn't
It's
work.
not gonna work.
So, yes, it seems perhaps a little excessive. It's really the only way this works.
Yep.
So,
Could you speak a little bit, to the extent that you can, about the vulnerability of the town? to cyber attacks? And do you feel comfortable that, that we've taken the right steps, that the budget is sufficient to address those issues?
Yeah, I feel like we've taken a multi-layered approach to defenses. Then again, sometimes you see these, Fortune 500 companies that put millions and millions of dollars against defenses, and sometimes it gets through.
Tell the story about how I caught that thing today.
You caught something?
I caught a fishing attempt.
Yeah, he
Didn't fall for it
he sent me an email.
because of the training.
Was
we
it
got
from Steve?
He didn't tell me if it was a
Yeah,
setup
yeah.
or not.
But, I mean, you've done a great job in sending those out to town employees,
That's right.
just to
Yeah.
make sure
Exactly.
that we're aware, and that people know how to respond. And
Right.
if they do respond, by clicking the link when they shouldn't, you follow up, which is critical. Yeah.
Correct. We did implement cybersecurity training last year. So as part of the initial training, and then as part of the onboarding process, everybody goes through a video on, phishing attacks, what to look out for in emails, things like that. We also send out occasional phishing emails to see how people react, and then we can alert them on, certain red flags to look for within the emails.
Are there things that other peer communities are doing that we should think about doing, or you think we're comfortable where we are now?
I think we have, spam filtering in place, we have antivirus on the endpoints, we have web content filter in place, we have firewalls in place. I'll tell you, I think, especially because the weakest point is the end user.
Yeah.
I think the endpoint protection, the web content filtering is a huge tool in preventing any of those attacks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, actually, before you joined the board, just Karen and Mary will remember, we were granted some money from the state for being a community compact
Yeah.
member,
Mhm.
and Steve helped to
From the
author
governor's office,
the
yeah.
cybersecurity best practices for the state.
Yeah, we had a cybersecurity assessment that they performed, and we still do that on an ongoing basis, and then try to mitigate any findings we find.
On the budget, the computer service agreements,
Correct.
there's that increase. What is the reason for that?
Yes, that's because we began with the cybersecurity assessments last year. That's ongoing support for that, to continue that.
Okay, so that's the 202 to 214 increase. This is item 11372.
That would be under the computer service agreements.
Yep.
Yeah, 113725320.
Yep.
Correct.
On the GIS, I can just tell you from my personal experience on the zoning board that zoning, planning use GIS extensively.
Mhm.
And so I'm really encouraged that there's going to be a full-time person here.
Like your optimism.
Yeah, well, thank you for addressing that. One of the things that GIS does is it benefits not only the town, but it also benefits developers trying to figure out how to lay things out. Do we have any sort of fee contemplated for developer use of this?
So the municipalities, and I think both of your examples I gave you from Wellesley and Concord are, as a page, an example of data sales.
Mhm.
So to the extent that we put together state data, I'm not sure we're allowed to sell that, but if we're creating data from scratch in town, which is be part of this
Sure.
person's job, we can ask for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking to monopolize the data
Yeah.
because it benefits all of us. I just
Absolutely.
want to make sure we're
Absolutely.
considering revenue.
And there is
opportunities.
also some security in some of that data too, that we would take into account.
Yep. That's all I got.
Mary?
A couple things. First of all, on the GIS coordinator role, I would just point out that when the town purchases the water company, there are important GIS services that the water company is going to need. And if this position were funded, I would see the possibility that when the water superintendent comes in, that there would be the opportunity for the water company and the ratepayers, if you will, to share in some of this cost. Tom and I talked about whether or not to put that offset into the budget, and we felt that if you look back in Hingham, we typically haven't done those things until the arrangements are done, so the town really hasn't officially taken over. But I will tell you that if we take over April 1st, that $9,360 is going, I mean, there will be additional GIS needs in the water company. So, again, Steve, I know you're going into the advisory committee, but, you know, I think that that's a possibility. I was just doing a little bit of quick math. The IT budget is less than 0.4%, not 4%, 0.4% of the whole town budget. And IT is one of those departments that just touches everything in the town. And, you know, we're so lucky to have Steve and Kate Richardson, who do all kinds of things and respond to 10 calls a day while they're supporting everything else. To me, when you're looking at overlap and training for such a key position, this is where I'm gonna rely on the department head to say what the time frame is. I don't think that's up to the number crunchers or anybody else. I think this is one of a really valued member of our team who we're really gonna miss, saying, this is what I think is needed for the smooth transition of the town. Okay. I view that as a necessity, and even, you know, we've been talking about, well, if there's a delay in hiring, I just think that there's a lot of time that's going to be needed to transition in the job. And this is the type of job where, as Steve is training his backfill, he's responding to 9.2 calls a day and stuff is happening. So I appreciate the thought that you've put into this as far as what's needed for the smooth transition for the town. I mean, our email goes down, and the town's ability to conduct business is severely compromised. So, you know, and by the way, the $61,000, if you assume our revenue goes up by $3 million a year, which is kind of what it does, it's 2% of the revenue increase. I think this money's working pretty hard for the town.
Right.
And Steve, I would just say, you know, it's just, I mean, we're gonna see you for a very long time, but we just truly value not just what you do, but how you do it. And, you know, I know in the last month on the water company, we asked you to jump in and attend some meetings to help us understand some of the IT requirements. And, you know, I know it's not exactly in your wheelhouse, and I appreciate the fact that you were jumping in, and I also appreciate that you've found, you know, a resource that we might be able to talk to nearby, so that when we select an operator, we can, you know, perhaps interface with them. So really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that.
I know you mentioned Kate Richardson. I don't want to forget Joe Lindsay either. Without
Yes,
the two of them,
and Joe.
I could not accomplish what we accomplish in that department, so.
Anything further?
No.
You know, much of what I would have said has been said. I will echo, however, the commitment of this very lean and mean team in IT, you, Steve, Kate, and Joe. And to me, that's all the more reason to make sure that we have that overlap. It's not like we have a deep bench there. We've got two other very, very hardworking folks in your group. And so we really do need, I think, to bring that person in with enough runway to make sure that that things progress smoothly. So I share Joe and Mary's view that it's really essential to the function of the town to have that transition period. The other thing I just wanted to point out, and again, Mary and Joe sort of brought it up, is just the number of departments that you touch across the town, including the schools. And so that that is reflected here as a, kind of payback from the schools for your support for their IT operations as well. And, I do appreciate you stepping in to help with analysis with respect to the water company acquisition. I've, said it before, and probably continue to say it as we note places where town services can be helpful to both the acquisition as well as the operation of the water company. I think we also have to be mindful that the water company is an enterprise fund, and we need to be careful in structuring the relationship so that it's, fair and equitable to the town and fair and equitable to the ratepayers. Questions from the public with respect to the information technology budget this evening? Okay, any further comments? Steve, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Public Works,
DPW Superintendent Sylvester.
What page?
185.
Tom, what page did you say?
185.
Randy,
Yes,
how's your day today?
busy.
I can't imagine why.
Just kind of top it off with a visit to the Board of Selectmen.
There you go.
Snowstorm,
All
sprinkled
right.
in
Yeah,
the
just a
middle.
little snow
I couldn't
and
wait
ice
all
and-
day.
Yeah, great. If you would, take us through your budget, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, it's changed a little bit. We now have 6 divisions. Engineering, fleet maintenance, highway, sewer, transfer station, and tree and park. Some of the, I'm not gonna get through all the benchmarks and whatnot, but, one of the things I did want to speak to you is basically the key initiatives, and I'll answer any question you like. One of the big ones there is a $20,000 increase in the road building budget, which, in the drainage part of it, it's going to the municipal stormwater separate sewer systems, MS4 program with a Phase 2 stormwater. Each year we will be in year 2, and each year there's more stringent requirements. And by the end of this permit, which ends in 5 years, we should have 6 initiatives taken, put into place. And one is the Public Education and Outreach Program, and we have contracted with the North and South River Watershed Association.
Okay.
So they're taking care of a lot of that work, which is very helpful. Public participation is another one. One of the big ones is illicit detection and elimination. And that involves quite a bit, and that's, again, this is a plug for GIS. We have to GIS our whole drainage system and then delineate all the outfalls and the catchments. And then we have to actually test each outfall a third of the system a year for different parameters. One is, actually, they're all new parameters. Bacteria, which is gonna cost money, because it's gonna have to go to a certified lab, and other parameters, which we can buy test kits for, but we will still be a cost to it. The other facets of this is management of construction site runoff. I'm working with planning on that. Also, management of post-construction site runoff. And these two are pretty important to me, because anytime there's a big development, even if it's a single lot, and the erosion controls aren't in place, then we have to clean storm basins and catch basins and check the system. So it's pretty important. Sweep the streets, whatnot. So, and the last one, which has been going on since the inception of this, is the good housekeeping and municipal operations. And that entails making sure we sweep the streets so many times a year, we're cleaning the catch basins twice a year, that we have programs to make sure that well, right now, it's just a transfer station, but because they have a certain amount of chemicals at the transfer station and oil, then we have to make sure that the stormwater is treated in a certain way, which it is. So those are the 6 big initiatives that are coming up, and each one of these are going to cost us some money. The big one right now is the illicit discharge program and getting the mapping done. This is kind of a new format for me.
So, for the illicit discharge mapping, if we are successful in adding a GIS coordinator, would that timing work for you for this mapping function?
That person will be on in July.
If that person's
Yeah,
on at the,
any help in that area is huge. I'm actually talking to Steve Becker now about buying a program for the, it's a module of the program that we use now for call taking. And we do have a method of going out and doing this. It's just not, it's not very efficient.
it's not efficient, yeah.
So I am looking into a module that, all this needs record keeping, and we have to keep specific records. So this new module would keep those records for us, and when our reports are due that goes to the EPA, I can basically print them out, and they'll be, we can submit them.
Yep, okay.
Unless you have questions.
So I think the biggest thing that's happening in Randy's budget this season is the absorption of the prior engineering department. If you remember in an earlier meeting, I kind of explained that we took all the responsibilities of the former department and segmented them and dispersed them appropriately across the entirety of the organization. A lot of it centered in DPW, but not all. So there were 3 positions that landed, that those responsibilities landed within the DPW. The town engineer will now become, as you just told you, part of the DPW department. We're also hiring an assistant DPW department head that'll assist with some of those duties, and an additional admin staff to pick up where, again, a lot of the engineering support work that had been done before. The other 2 positions we talked about were the GIS tonight and the procurement specialist from my presentation at the beginning.
Yep, yep.
So, Tom, so what I'm seeing on the budget, the engineering new items, you've got a position, you've got a line item, architect and engineer services, that's new for 45,000. And then, am I correct, the paving supplies?
That's right.
Engineering, which is 284?
Exactly.
Are there other items other than those 2?
Nope, well, so there were, but they were relatively small, so I'll explain those 2, and if you notice, the old engineering budget is in the book at page 187.
Yep.
The 284 was taken, it's the paving supplies, that was taken in whole from the former engineering department budget and just level funded and dropped into this budget. The 45,000 for engineering services is taking the prior allotment of just about $15,000 or so from the engineering department budget, although it's looking like, yeah, architect and engineering services. In 19, actual was 22,000. 18 was 18,000. So it's in that $15,000 to $20,000 range is what that prior budget was in engineering. What we're proposing here is intended to, if you remember when I present, or when I've talked about the town engineer, the new town engineer position, the way we're envisioning that work now being done is that that person will be managing projects rather than general contracting them directly, the way it has been done in the past. Following a recent example would be following the Foth Engineering example from the dredging project. So Ken Corson, as the harbor master, hired an engineering firm to help walk through the procurement, which would be done through the procurement officer, the design work, which would be done with either by the town engineer, depending on how complex the project is, by town engineer, possibly through a general contractor, and then the actual design and construction being done by an outside firm. So the point is that town engineer now is managing these large projects rather than engineering them. And that's what this money is meant to augment, when that person has to call in assistance. Now, this is a ballpark at what that cost will be in year one. We don't know. We haven't done it before.
Yeah.
So,
Back to the budget, the other item that I see basically a doubling was utilities, electric, going from 12 to 24. Why,
So,
being a municipal light hitting you harder, or what's going on?
well, I'll try to explain it. We never had a demand charge before, and now we do. And a demand charge is basically the highest use of energy in any one time period during the month. So I always give the example of when I worked at the water company, we ran on a demand charge. And so we would run our pumps to supply water, and then would have to backwash a filter, which is another big pump. Well, we would turn that on and would get a high demand charge. So what I did was figure out a way to lower that demand charge on a regular basis. So we didn't wash filters during the day or at a high demand time. We washed them at night when the demand was low. So we never got that high demand charge. So, such as the transfer station, that we have to run all of our equipment when we run it, because it's open. The sewer department, we're looking into VFDs, which ramp up slow, so it's not using as much electricity to turn on a pump. Turns it on slowly, so it's lower electricity, lower demand. We have that in the capital budget to swap the majority of the electrical starters on the motors out to VFDs to lower that electrical bill.
So we are responding to peak load pricing.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Could you speak on a positive note about DEP grant applications? That's on your chart, but I didn't see what-
DEP grant applications. So, every year, and this is primarily for the transfer station, is that they hand out recycling grants. It's called RDP money, Recycling Dividend Program. And the DEP has set aside quite a bit of money, and they value each task that you do dealing with recycling. They put a point value to it, and then every year they assign money to the point values. And every year the criteria changes a little bit. It gets more stringent, or they add something new. So when we recycle cardboard or glass or anything like to that, we have to recycle so many items, we will get a point. If we it escapes me. If we have so many
Right.
people, we get a point. We get into another range. All the public buildings have to have a recycling policy, which Tom sends out a letter every year. And I have to remind them, so we can get those points. So then the DEP grants a dividend, basically, out of the program, a grant award, and we've been receiving anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 a year to go to the program, recycling program.
Is there anything more that we can do to enhance the revenue that we get from these applications for grants?
Well, a lot of it is focused on organizations or towns, municipalities that don't recycle. So, and a lot of them are more of the larger scale. out of our group, we could do things that would give us more money, but end up costing the town more money, because in order to do this, a program, it's gonna cost. So I haven't seen the the criteria this year, but,
So it's not a big revenue source that we should be looking for.
well, it is towards, we buy containers with it,
Okay.
things of that nature.
So the last question I have really is what you just touched on, which is recycling. What I've read is with changes in national, international markets, it's difficult to dispose of recycling. And so are there any changes that you would recommend in Hingham in terms of how we handle?
So, and this is what I tell everybody, is we make out the best when our recycling is of good quality. So right now, the recycling market, we only get paid for cardboard, where we used to get paid for tin, plastic, all the recyclables. We used to make $125,000 a year. Now we're in, depending on what our cardboard market is, it's maybe 25, 50,000, because cardboard's down that much. So it's basically a buyer's market right now, and every company that does the recycling, they want good quality material, so then they can pass it down the line and sell it themselves. So if they have, they call them outthrows, but it's an outthrow is something that will contaminate a load, contaminate a recyclable. If there's any of those, then they'll just throw it out, and usually we get charged for it. So the cleaner the recyclables, if there's one message after that long-winded explanation, if there's anything that I want to get out there, is that the cleaner the recyclables bringing in, the cleaner our material going out, the more marketable it's going to be. Now, is it going to make money? No, but it's when we might not get charged for it, or we'll be charged less for it. And that's what I've seen so far, because the public does do a good job, but it always can be better.
And you and I talked to Cleaner Greener Hingham about maybe upping the ante on education efforts around that.
Yes.
Because I do think that, recycling sort of evolved. I think the rules can be confusing. I think that Cleaner Greener Hingham has been out there at public events trying to educate people around the importance not only of recycling, but of recycling properly. And, I think if we can partner with them a little bit on that, it'd be helpful.
Absolutely.
Any further? Mary?
Randy, thank you, and I just want to start out and say that, this year, between the water company, personnel changes in the town, a lot of work has been demanded of you and your team, and you in particular, and we've asked you to wear a lot of different hats, a lot of them at the same time. And I just want to say that we appreciate it and thank you. And I hope that in 2020, you won't be having to wear as many hats at the same time. But all kidding aside, your commitment to this town and to serving the citizens of this town is just, it's exceptional, and we so appreciate it.
I appreciate the comment.
A couple questions about your budget.
Sure.
It sounds like with some of these initiatives, some of them are mandates. I don't know when you're going into the advisory committee, but I always think it's a good idea, and I think it might help this board as well. If we knew, if some dollars are going up and they're due to mandates, let's flag those, because as we're making choices in budgets, we have to just know that. So if you and Tom, as a follow-up, could just flag any dollar increases that are due to mandates, that would be very helpful, and I'd encourage you to share it with the advisory committee. If I'm looking at your budget, and I'm trying to kind of do some quick math with like engineering and things, but rather than try to get in the weeds and discuss that here, I might ask again with Tom and Michelle's help. So I'm looking at the engineering budget from this year, and it's $600,000. little 601, but it's $600,000. So Randy's budget is going up by about $500,000. I would be interested in knowing how much of that $500,000 was just the growth in your budget, right? And how much of it is due to the new responsibilities. And where I'm going with that is that in terms of the town, and Tom, I know you and Michelle put a lot of thought into this. I think what you've told me is that in the organizational realignment you've done, we're actually delivering the services that were previously under the engineering department in a more cost-effective way.
Yes.
And that in some ways is creating funding capacity for two things that are labeled as our additional requests, the GIS coordinator and the procurement person. So if I'm looking at the engineering budget of $600,000 has been distributed, Randy's picked up the bulk of it. I'd like to know what that number is, because my guess is that it's less than $500,000. Because I think the salaries in your base department are going up, your expenses are going up.
That's right.
I have a feeling that the cost to deliver those services for next year is gonna be lower than $600,000, and I don't want that to get lost in these budgets. And Tom, again, I think that's something that will be helpful and informative to the advisory committee, because we're saying, we've got this engineering department, so some of the work and cost have gone here, some of the work and cost have gone here. I think one summary of the movement of the dollars will help us, and it will help the advisory committee, because I think what you're saying is, if the procurement position is not filled, some of that work's gotta get absorbed.
Yep.
And the reason that I think that's really important is because I think that if we don't do an analysis like that, our public works budget could be in a situation where anything that's unfunded is falling there. And so,
The one thing I would add to that is, or follow up to that, is that if you remember, we didn't take the responsibilities from the old engineering department and mirror them or
Correct.
replace them one for one. We like to think we're getting far more bang for
correct.
that dollar, or perhaps even less of the dollar,
Yeah.
by distributing it appropriately. So yes, I can do that. It's a tricky analysis, but we'll do our best to show it in a clearer way.
I think at a high level, to just say,
Yeah.
the $600,000, this work was $600,000 last year. This year, it's this many dollars, and by the way, we're doing more with those dollars. My main point in doing that is twofold. First of all, if somebody looks at Randy's budget, they'll say, well, gosh, Randy, this is a $500,000 increase. And I think that will help him in talking to the advisory committee. And secondly, I think it will help us understand the consequences if those additional positions are not filled, which,
Yep.
You've talked about.
Right. Okay. Can do.
I think it just might help
Yep.
put something,
And when we get something together for AdCom, of course, we'll distribute it to the three of you as well.
If I can just follow up on Mary, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but so, going back to the points that I identified with the 284,000, the 45, so that's $329,000. So there's probably another, which could bring it up to 350.
Right.
Maybe even
Vehicle,
400.
there was
Right.
vehicle
So
fuel.
that's sort of
right,
the
that's what I'm
analysis.
looking
Yeah.
for.
I
That's
think
what I'm,
Yep. It was
You
some
know- That's where
vehicle
we go.
fuel, it was some
Right.
vehicle costs,
I
it
mean,
was
and-
office supplies from two different departments that got merged, it was stuff like that.
the other thing it'll do is, I do think that it's always helpful for us and for, we like to look at year-over-year trends, and I think it would also just be helpful to say, this is, of that $500,000 budget increase, this is how much is just due to, sort of the Public Works Department as it existed in the past, and this is what's due to
Sure.
kind of realignment.
Yep, we can do that.
Well, it's a helpful initial exercise in terms of your thoughtful analysis of what the functions were and where they could most efficiently reside.
Yes.
So it, like you said, may be a little tricky initially, but I think as an ongoing
Yeah.
point of reference, it's
It's added a
helpful.
lot of value.
Yep. Anything further?
Not on this one.
I think that, I know that you sort of move forward to key initiatives, but the mission and service and your benchmarking pages for for the folks at home, I think really speak to the breadth of your involvement across the town, you and your staff's involvement across the town, and the, key infrastructure responsibilities that you undertake each and every day for all of us. And, I echo Mary and Joe's really gratitude to you and your department, particularly this year, because I do think you in particular stepped up in a really big way, as did other folks in your group. And, it may have been behind the scenes for the public, but it wasn't behind the scenes for us. It was, we knew we could count on you, and we appreciated it, and continue to appreciate it. I did wonder, and I know I'm missing it, but where in the budget is the assistant DPW superintendent?
So it's built into the salary
It's
structure.
built in the salaries,
So is it in the wages full-time?
Yes.
yes.
Okay,
That wasn't a new request because it was a pre-existing position with pre-existing services that had been rendered in the past. That's why we didn't make it a new request.
okay. So had we filled?
It's posted.
Okay.
Yep.
No, but I mean, was it an existing position?
Yes.
Yes.
So Randy was the
I
assistant.
was the assistant.
We hadn't filled it for the last
I
however
gotcha,
many years.
I gotcha,
Yep,
okay,
yep.
okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure I understood where it was hitting the budget. Questions for Randy on the DPW budget?
So I think we touched on a whole bunch of budgets
Yeah.
there. We did public works, engineering, maybe recycling and landfill.
Yeah, we haven't really done sewer, I guess,
We haven't
right?
done sewer yet.
Sewer.
Could I just ask on snow removal?
Mm-hmm.
So we're suggesting that the snow removal budget is the same as FY '20, and so I'm thinking that's still chronically below the 5-year average, the 10-year average. It's a structural deficit. I
Yes.
get that we can deficit spend. What was the thinking on keeping it flat?
I was asking for a lot of change in this budget, including several new positions. I did ask for the 25, we had two main structural deficits every year. Well, there's others, but two main ones, legal
Legal.
and snow and ice. And we had made progress on the legal last year, and I thought the procurement would attack some of that legal as well, so I wanted to continue that good movement forward, so I sacrificed snow and ice this year in place of that. That was the thought process, Mary. I didn't want to appear greedy and looking for too much. It's a structural deficit that we have to address as a community at some point, for sure.
Yeah. When we want to go ahead and do that, to me, that's not an additional request. I mean, it's, if you think about level services, that's kind of what it is. I might suggest that we provide our advisory colleagues with the 5 and 10-year averages, because, when, at the end of the year, we go to do reserve fund transfers and things, that's always a pretty large number, even if there isn't a lot of, Randy, that's what? That's 5 plowing events?
Yeah, if that.
And filling the shed with snow. So I just think that it would be a good idea that we all had an understanding of how far those dollars go, so that when Randy isn't going in for a reserve fund transfer on snow and ice, it's not a big surprise, and he's not getting beaten up for it. We will
Well,
together make that
Well,
decision.
and AdCom may come to different conclusions. I
That's
mean,
absolutely right.
It's been something
Yeah,
we've
that's right.
struggled with for, year in and year out.
That's right.
So it's just hard, it's certainly hard to predict. We can deficit spend. We do make good, obviously, on the budget, but, at some point, I think we need to make progress in allocating dollars to an expense we know we're gonna have.
The reality of the world, that's right.
Further questions on the DPW budget? Okay, and related budgets, so we probably should cover sewer.
Looks like sewer's on page 193.
Yeah. So the sewer budget, of course, the utilities are gonna be up because of that demand charge that we're discussing. So it's up 70% from last year's budget. But it's in line with what we've been using. The other main topic is the rates. And the rates are, in the past, we get rates from the town hall. We have to pay them, and we have to pay the MWRA. The rates from Hull have varied from 15% to 27% without any warning. So we had to scramble to pay that.
When do those rates typically get set by them?
Excuse me?
When do the rates get set with Hull?
So they've changed their method. They've basically set their rates for 5 years. I haven't been able to, this year I got the schedule. I did get it late. Usually they would let us know the rates a month before town meeting, which it's
Yeah, it's
too late to set it.
Yep.
So this year, they're about 10% increase.
Okay.
Because they also have a fee involved with, depending on the amount of gallons that you use, there's a fee. No, I'm sorry, it's a service fee, depending on the amount of services you have. That's in addition to the rates, the percentage increase. So I put a 15% increase, just to be safe. The other entity that we pay is the MWRA. And they're usually really good in giving me a number. They estimated 5%. I put it in for 7%, just to be safe. And those are the two biggest areas in the sewer budget. I do have to mention that I did present this to the sewer commission.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that, yep.
Yeah, they voted unanimously to accept it, so.
And this budget will form the basis of their rate determinations for
Yes.
sewer ratepayers, and the sewer budget is fully funded from those rates.
Yes.
Joe?
I just note the same thing as I saw before, the electric utility is doubled. And I assume it's just the same as before. Other than that, I think you've answered all the questions that I would have.
Mary?
I would just make a note, Randy and Tom, if I'm looking on page 194 in the budget book, and it doesn't appear to me, if I'm looking at the right line, as if the 10% increase that Randy talked about is reflected in the 21, so you might want to just double check that with Sue. I mean, I think, again, this is a pass-through from the operating budget, but that would be something that the commissioners, as they go through the rate-setting process, would want to make sure that they had it updated.
What page?
There's a lot of ins and outs in this
What
budget, so
page?
I may be looking at the wrong line.
I don't have 194.
Yep, okay.
Questions from the public with respect to the sewer budget? Seeing none? We can figure that out, that
Okay.
10% out?
Yeah.
All right,
I think that's through all of Randy's budgets.
all right.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks
very
for
much.
being here. And,
Thank you, Randy.
Thanks.
you know, every time I see something like, the monument repair, I think of you. I think, we come up with these great ideas, and then who helps us take care of that?
That's right.
We figure it out.
You do, we do, and we appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here.
Thanks.
Yep. Have a good night.
You too.
So Susan is still in Newbury, so I don't think she's gonna make it. So there's no
We
reason.
were gonna ask Hingham Maritime to indulge us to wait for Susan to get here, because she's worked with all of us so diligently on the lease, which is, as you all know better than I do, quite a complex document. But she has a hearing with another Board of Selectmen on the North Shore. Yeah, I
I
know.
don't get that.
So, I don't know who wants to maybe come to the table and take us through. So, let me just back up and say, we're here tonight because the lease builds in some milestones and some evaluation points for the Board of Selectmen. You might recall last year, we entered into an extension period with respect to the Phase 1 term of the lease. So the lease is divided up into phases, and, you know, as we hit, again, certain milestones, we move through to the next phase. We extended phase one for a couple different reasons. One was sewer approvals. Again, you may remember discussion last year. The wharf in question is just outside the sewer district boundary. We worked diligently with the state and have gotten what's called a reach-in classification, so we're able, in a very short distance, to be able to provide sewer service without really significant additional complexity and processes at the state level. The other aspect that's reflected in the lease are wharf improvements. You've seen Bill Reardon and members of the Harbor Development Committee before us as they talk about our harbor resiliency efforts and our plans to increase wharf height. This wharf, again, would be subject to those efforts, and that continues to be ongoing. So the way that the lease is actually written is we extended phase one once, and essentially, since those two major milestones remain outstanding but attainable, we roll into an automatic extension of phase one for an additional one-year period, which would terminate next December 31st. It does provide us with an opportunity to check in with you, because as part of that phase one activity level, there was fundraising that it should be taking place by the HMC community, and also gives us a chance just to get an update on all the good things that are going on down on the wharf. So if you would like to take us through, I know you've shared some information with us. Take it away.
If I may first, I'm Stuart English, and I am the new president of the Hingham Maritime Center, newly elected in November. And just wanted to quickly touch on just a couple of overview issues, and then I'll turn it over to Logan, our executive director, to go through the 2018-2019 operational seasons and how things went. And I think we're very pleased to be on the wharf. Obviously, it's been our home for nearly 50 years at this point. And we look forward to improving the wharf and completing all of the requirements and the desires incorporated into the lease. We do find that our timing is a bit of a problem, and specifically with respect to the fundraising. We went out initially when the lease was signed and raised a lot of interest in providing funding for the construction that we anticipated. And as you might imagine, as that has dragged out, the enthusiasm has waned considerably from the individuals who initially expressed great interest. So we remain somewhat limited in our ability to continue to raise funds. We do continue to talk it up. We do continue to take meetings. We do continue to make significant efforts to raise funds for this effort. However, with timing uncertain, it does create a significant hurdle. So I don't mean to offer that as an excuse, rather as a reason why we find that our fundraising is increasingly challenged at the moment with respect to fundraising specifically for these large construction projects. So again, we do continue to generate what enthusiasm we can. We look forward to a time when we can pin more concretely the timing of both the wharf completion and then, of course, the construction on the building. One significant effort that we do have ongoing, which we hope will continue to maintain the enthusiasm of our donors, is the docks project, which I know that you're all aware of, and we look forward to seeing that push through as rapidly as we can. We know there's an RFQ in process that will give some evidence of progress to those who have committed to donate to our projects. So I thank you for your efforts in getting that accomplished. With that, I'm ready to turn it over to Logan unless you have questions for me.
Why don't we hear from Logan, and then we can just open it up to sort of general discussion from the board and then the public?
Very good. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stuart.
Sure. So I prepared a few slides.
And if you could just introduce yourself for the folks at home.
My name is Logan Greenlee. I'm the executive director of Hingham Maritime Center. I provided you with a few slides. These are some talking points around sort of our 2019 season. Last April, I sent along a slide deck that was somewhat similar to this, but this is a little bit more expanded to include some other areas. Our financial performance this year was solid. We were able to reduce substantial amounts of cost in our operations and keep our revenues roughly the same. We made some significant capital investments in boats and equipment, which is part of the reason for our underrun this year. But generally speaking, we had a great year financially. You will see that our donations line item has gone down year over year from 2018 to 2019. That's kind of reflects some of Stuart's comments. We continue to be a very youth-oriented aspect of Hingham. 72% of our participants are under the age of 18, and 50% of those are between the ages of 12 and 14. There are a couple pie charts that give you a more detailed breakdown. We employed 40 staffers this year. 30 of them were Hingham residents. Many of them are of high school or college age, or are recent graduates. So we're a very significant part of the youth here in Hingham. We had over 73 distinct programs over the fall, spring, summer, and winter. Many rowing, sailing, and a handful of social activities as well. This year we tried a new program format. It's a combo class of sailing and rowing, where kids spend a little bit more time down on the wharf. That was fairly popular, and we're going to schedule an actual program next summer that supports that. And so that, you know, it's difficult for us to run complete programs all day long on the wharf without additional facilities. So, you know, this is kind of a bridge between those two formats. We also expanded general self-service access for adults who row. So if you wanted to take a boat out and go out on the harbor, that's now available. We put together a training and certification program so that we can ensure the safety of the participants on the harbor. That's a big concern of mine, so.
How many, do you have some sense of the stats for folks that avail themselves of that?
Yes, so we've, let me go through programs, and then the next slide after that
Okay.
covers it. We continue to provide access to the high school sailing and rowing teams. We also provided a program for the Sunset Point Camp in Hull for no fee, and was able to run a fairly successful program through July and August. We've also worked with Derby Academy, a local school, and the YMCA to provide sailing classes this summer. So under customers and bookings, the blue graph is total customers unique. So that's not, it doesn't represent the number of times they purchase something from us, but the number of unique customers we've had over the course of the year. As you can see, there's fairly steady growth. The red graph is the number of bookings that we've had year over year. So the solid red bar are people who made a reservation for an entire class. Typically that's 4 to 6 weeks or something like that. The light pink at the top are what we call drop-ins. And so that's how we allowed people to come and take shells out, or held more flexible schedules. So the drop-in bookings represent how many people just came just once, not for an entire class. So the use is pretty high. And we're going to continue to structure certain things and always allow people to come down and take equipment out. And our hope is to expand that further into sailing next year. But rowing was probably the easiest this year to take a shot with. By the definition in the lease, we had one special event this year, the Hingham Harbor Feast fundraiser, or Hingham Maritime Center Harbor Feast fundraiser, which was quite successful. We raised almost $60,000 this year, while keeping our expenses nearly the same as last year. So that was great. Looking to 2020, we're really, the most important piece of our operation is that dock. So we'll be very interested in doing everything we can to help you all get that moving, so that hopefully in 2021 we'll be putting a new dock in. I'm really focused on improving our staff training, so that especially our youth instructors have a clear path and a clear framework on, powerboat operations, safe operations, how to teach. U.S. Sailing has some really great models for training staff from very young to also, very highly experienced individuals. And structuring our training more closely with U.S. Sailing's is a goal for next year. I ran some adult sailing programs this fall, which hasn't happened in a while. We also had some weekend programs, so we'll be looking to expand our adult sailing opportunities. We tried a bunch of different boats and platforms, and so have a pretty good idea of how to do that. We will continue to test and expand our program formats so that we can utilize the wharf to its maximum extent possible. I think this fall we had one day where there were probably 200 kids on the wharf, and it was awesome, but it was madness. But, between the high school, the sailing team, derby, sailing and rowing, it was chaotic, but that's great, and I'd love to see more of that.
Great, thank you. Joe, questions?
Great support of the program. I think it's an important asset to the town, and you folks, not just the two of you, but the group that you represent really are contributing. Could you update me on where we stand with the boathouse in terms of getting permits and what progress is being made, and if anything, what you see in the next 6 to 8 months?
So, we have not progressed beyond the last meeting where you approved our conceptual plan. We've talked about visiting zoning. We would like to continue with that, but I think that we're at a point where without securing funding for improving Barnes Wharf, we are going to outlive the context of the construct that we have right now, which we'd very much like to discuss with you about how to get that back on track and get it focusing everyone's efforts on a timeline and a schedule that more accurately represents kind of how our projects are progressing right now. I know that a lot of time and effort was put into the lease initially, and some assumptions were made around schedules and timelines, but I think that given how things are progressing in terms of improvements for the wharf, we're not going to be able to meet the time milestones within the lease as it is written now.
I was not on the board when there was the presentation on the boathouse. I just didn't know if that was static, if it's changed, and where it is. It sounds like there has not been progress in moving forward with that.
No, and I don't, the lease ends, if we don't secure funding for the wharf for town meeting, then the lease goes to the alternate term at the end of next year. It's basically, so, that says, very much want to keep it going down a path, but it kind of falls off the end of the tracks if we don't get together and discuss how to.
Joe, if I may ask a follow-up question. When you were here in March, we talked about a design, and we talked about the fact that you were looking for a design that couldn't be built. And we had a lot of conversation in March about Hingham Maritime, before you come in again, and before your season got busy, to go to the second floor and to work with our departments, and we made people available to say, we need to come to consensus on a project that meets your needs and that can be built, and that we needed to do some work on that. And I've heard consistently for 5 years that there are 2 impediments to fundraising. One, which you've cited, which is the wharf improvement project, which is the town's responsibility. But the other is the lack of a clear concept for what a building would look like. And, I get that because you want to show people a building. Are you saying that since you were here in March, you haven't talked to the second floor about the boathouse at all?
We have not. We got to a point with zoning where we would require 4 variances that were low risk. So our next step was to talk to planning to resolve the parking issues.
I'm really disappointed that that hasn't happened since March. As someone on this board who spent 5 years on this, and particularly in my first year on the board, hundreds of hours on this lease, I think this, at least I think I made it clear in March that it was really important for those conversations to take place and that we wanted to help you do that. It's disappointing to be sitting here to know that that hasn't happened. And as you talk about re-entering into negotiations, the part that I'm struggling with is I don't know if we can agree on a concept for a building. And re-entering negotiations is time and effort that is not only costly to the town, but there's an opportunity cost because we can't do other things. I would feel a whole lot better entering into renegotiations if we knew we had alignment on the concept for a building. And I'm concerned that in your plans for 2020, it's not listed here. And I would urge you to reconsider that.
We will consider this. We will consider it. I think my concern is that the town's time is valuable, and we don't want to spend it unnecessarily. And where there's no clear timeline as to when we'll be able to move on any of our projects other than the docks, we were concerned that going to zoning and saying, here's what we're conceptualizing, but without any timeline, it really sort of puts them in a position where they're making a decision on something that's entirely uncertain. So we don't want to spend that time unnecessarily. I am more than happy, at your direction, to take the project to them and to show them where we're at and to receive any feedback and to do the same thing with planning. But again, we don't want to waste the town's resources any more than anybody else does.
Yeah.
And I think at least in my mind, there's some concern about taking this where it's just really not ready from a holistic perspective. But we can pursue more determination from the zoning and planning if that's the board's desire.
Stuart, I appreciate that. I guess, when we left things in March, that's what I expected was going to happen. And the fact that we're sitting here 8 months later, and, if that was the decision that was made, it would have been a good idea to sort of let us know about that, because I actually went back and kind of watched the tape from the meeting that we had, and I thought it was pretty clear that we were struggling with, what sort of a building could be built to meet your programmatic requirements against the zoning. And I think we all realize that that's really tricky. In my opinion, that's so fundamental to these discussions that I think so that we don't waste anybody's time or the hard-earned money that takes you so long to raise. I think we got to make sure that there's enough of an overlap in what can be built and meeting your programmatic needs. Like, I really feel like we gotta dig into that, and that's what I was hoping was going to happen over the course of the year, because again, thinking about, and you were involved in those lease negotiations. We had, we both had lawyers in there. We both invested a lot of time, and I think it would really help, regardless of the timing of the wharf project, to know if there's a structure we can build. And frankly, I think I understand what you're saying on the fundraising, and I agree with it, but I've also heard that being able to show a building is important to fundraising. And I think right now you're in a box where you're saying, gosh, we don't want to show people a building that we can't build. And I get that. So we need to do that piece as well.
Sure.
I appreciate how hard it is to raise money, but I'm feeling like what's right in front of us needs to be, can we build a building that works for everybody and that can be built? And I'd
Well,
feel a whole lot better if we can explore that.
Well, and let's back up for a second, because I think the reason we entered into these negotiations is this is town-owned property. And, you know, while it's been your home for 50 years, it's still town-owned property. And so the question is, you know, what consideration comes back to the town? You know, aside from the fact that you're a fabulous community member and you provide services to the community, the other piece of this is what comes back to the town and on what timeline. And, you know, I think you're right. I think that we probably all thought things were gonna move more quickly. But the bottom line right now is that, you know, no capital improvement, other than the dock program at this point, has come back to the town under this lease agreement.
Correct.
Right.
One of the challenges that we face is that in trying to design a building without knowing the footprint of the wharf, we are limited in what we're able to determine in terms of setbacks, in terms of water levels. So it's hard to get much beyond a really conceptual level at this point. And so we talk about, can we design a building that we can actually build? Well, maybe, but we don't know if we're going to have 10 feet to work with or 5 feet to work with respect to the seawalls. We don't know what sort of elevations we're going to be working with. So there's still a lot of detail that we believe we need to have before we can progress too much farther with.
So I'm sort of wondering whether, like, you know, I know we automatically roll into this phase one, but it just doesn't seem like another year of phase one under the lease. It just doesn't seem like that's, you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe we need to kind of take this offline and dig into where we are and what can be accomplished, because it just strikes me that, the lease suggests that we're gonna progress to a certain point, and what I'm hearing from you tonight is that those expectations may not be realistic.
I think that's accurate, that the initial assumptions about timing clearly have proven to be inaccurate. And I think that we do need to dig in a little more on the details to determine what sort of timing we can establish or alternative methods of moving forward. If we're to continue to wait for the wharf to be rebuilt, that is a time limitation that we cannot control.
But
If, on the other hand, we're allowed to proceed without waiting for the wharf, there's something we can consider. So, I mean, these are changes that would radically alter our direction forward and our rate of progress. But at this point, based on the lease that we have in front of us, we're obligated to wait for the wharf improvements.
So I guess one thing that would have been helpful, and, you know, we are where we are tonight, I think goes to Mary's point, and that is, you know, I think when I left here last March, I had a clear understanding, I thought, of where things were gonna head. And, you know, and if that wasn't realistic, then it would have been nicer to know before tonight. And it sounds like at some point you all made the decision because you didn't pursue the conversations with the planning board, because it didn't seem prudent. And, you know, you're the experts on this project and your program. I certainly am not in that role, but, you know, I think we gotta do a better job of communicating, you know, notwithstanding the particular milestones in the lease, because it's just, as Mary said, and I conveyed this earlier today, it is disappointing to get here tonight and not advance the ball.
Yeah, if I may, on behalf of the Maritime Center, I know that we have been trying for several months to have such a discussion and have not been able to find a mutually agreeable date to meet with the selectmen. So we've been trying to get here ahead of this.
But we were expecting that you were gonna be talking to the second floor about a concept in order to then bring to us. That was where things were left. So I think you know, we were waiting on that, and I think the second floor was kind of telling us, hey, that those things haven't happened. And I know that there are aspects of the wharf project, but the Harbor Development Committee, we know how high the wharf is gonna be, and we're not gonna make it any bigger. We're not gonna make it any smaller. We're gonna we're gonna pretty much elevate what we have, and I think the height is like 10.5, or, there's a predetermined height. And I guess I would question whether the information we have about what's happening to Barnes Wharf is sufficient for us to come to agreement on a concept for a boathouse. Because when it came to us earlier in the year, there was talk about, 35 feet high and, some of these things. I would challenge us to see how much of a concept we can agree to, knowing what we know about the wharf. And I think, again, what that's going to allow us to do is to say, is there potential for us to have enough shared interest that this makes sense to go forward? And I say this mostly because I think we're on a path next year where we are together going to need to say, okay, we are at a choice point because of how the lease is structured, where we have to either renegotiate this lease or walk away from it. And I think what I'm trying to convey, and I think I hear Karen conveying the same thing, is if we have agreement on a concept, it's easier to enter into that. But if we don't have agreement on a concept, just speaking for me, it's tougher. And that's just a function of priorities and resources. So
Can I just jump in just real
If
quick?
if I may, I see that Nancy is trying to get a
I'm
word.
gonna ask you to have a seat for a second, Nancy.
So, I think the zoning is familiar with, as Mary just said, with the plans for the wharf. Emily Wentworth is familiar with all those plans. We could definitely, pull all that together, set up a meeting with Mary Savage, Dunham, who's board, they need to get in front of, with all that information, with Emily, get all the right people there, and have this discussion about what restrictions remain as unknown that will hinder the final creation of a plan for the boathouse. Let's let that be the next to-do, the next step, I think. And then if there are hindrances
Yeah, then we're in a
in designing that, then we're in a different place.
Because
If
I
there
don't
aren't.
think actually that we've, and maybe I've missed it, I'm getting old, so I might not remember. I don't know that we've fully gone through the conceptual design approval process that the lease calls for. I think we've had.
that's right.
We've had some general discussions.
That's
We've
right.
seen some pictures, but there's actually a little bit of a back and forth where I think this body actually has to approve that conceptual design. So,
Yeah.
so we need to work toward that, because that's actually overdue under the lease. And if this stuff can't be accomplished, or can't be accomplished in the way it's set out, I think we do need to make some decisions about whether we live with what's here, whether we renegotiate with what's here, whether we go to the alternate term and we let things progress. We have some options, but I think it'd be helpful, it sounds like it'd be helpful for you if we could communicate and work together on that. And Nancy Kerber, would you like to come to the podium?
I just want to add something, which is that from my experience on the zoning board and my dealings with the planning board, they are more than open to having projects come in that will not be implemented 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. And so I don't think, I appreciate your concern about wasting town resources, but that is in fact their goal. Their mission is in fact to assist in these projects. And I'm concerned that that opportunity has not been seized by the organization. I know the zoning board and the planning board are available and are eager to review this.
I'm gonna recognize Nancy.
Nancy Kerber, Hingham Maritime Board member and fairly involved in design steps and lease negotiations as well. And just my memory of last March's meeting is a little bit different than what we presented at that time. We had, of course, initially, a year or sometime before that, presented a design that was, we were not able to move forward with. There were too many variances. last March, we had reworked it to a plan we felt comfortable with. I had met with Emily ahead of that meeting with you to see if it was, we had reduced the needed variances down to a sort of acceptable level. She felt comfortable with it while she could make no promises. And so we felt comfortable presenting that to you. So my recollection is, or my feeling is that what we presented last March was a conceptual drawing, a design that we felt comfortable with, that we felt that would fit the program's needs, the Maritime Center's needs, would fit what the lease was asking for, and had variances that we were requesting that were in the scope of what seemed reasonable. We had reduced the height, so we weren't looking for the height variance that had been the greatest concern. We didn't go back to Emily because I felt at that time we had gotten to a building that we were comfortable with, and I'd had a conversation with Emily about where it stood. We did not proceed with, we have some calculations to do around the parking. I think there's little tweaks here and there that need to be made based on, what size is the berm, how, the rotary realignment may affect it a little bit. It won't be significant in the difference of numbers of parking spaces. So it's a matter of working through with Mary some different ideas on parking plans for when we have larger events. That we didn't proceed with. I had felt like that we had talked to Emily and had a conversation around a building design that we presented to you that we felt worked for us. So we can do more drawings around that, and certainly need to meet with Mary. And I'm happy to talk to Emily again, but I don't think we're able to reduce the number of variances we'd asked for any more than we did for last March. So that conversation wouldn't be much different with her than we've already had.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Logan?
And what Nancy just said is what I took away from the meeting as well. We did have several discussions with Emily, and I think from a building perspective, in terms of suiting the community's needs, I think we have the concept for that, and that is what we gave you. So from my perspective, it's really a question of whether or not we can get it approved by the zoning committee and by planning as well.
Well, again, I need to refresh my memory on this. I think we need to make sure that we've gone through the process that the lease calls for in terms of the board approving a conceptual design and what we need, what information we need to do that. I remember having discussions about maybe not fully building out or drawing the details of the building, but essentially coming up with the box. We should be able to get the dimensions generally situated on that site.
We do have that.
But the parking analysis is a part of that. So, can you build a building and one of the next functions is, one of the impediments to that is the parking. So anyway, I think that, as I understand the terms of the lease as outlined by Attorney Murphy, because the wharf improvements and sewer improvements have not been attained but are attainable, and because we voted last year to move into an extension of phase one, my reading of the lease is that this would automatically extend the phase one portion of the lease for an additional calendar year. And, I really think that we want to get this right for the community. This is, as you've suggested, just a critical asset for a seaside community. You've expanded access. Frankly, I've asked questions in the past about adult usage of the wharf area, and I really appreciate that you're adding that dimension, because I think it's terrific that there are so many kids using it, but I think there are a number of adults that don't otherwise have access to boating opportunities, and this is a public opportunity to do that. And I appreciate that you're thinking about that in your future programmings, and I'm sure the enhanced dock space will give you some additional resources to consider other programming alternatives as well. So we need to get it right, and I think we need to be better communicators, us and you. And so my suggestion would be that, this week, start to run into Christmas, that we try to get something on the calendar for the first of the year, with the Board of Selectmen's office and with one of us. I can't remember who the liaison is Joe, the lucky winner. No, I think that we gotta keep working it, and part of it is just, again, being able to communicate with Joe gives some exposure to us, about how those conversations are progressing. You look like you
To
wanted
your
say
point,
something.
we do need to vote on that conceptual plan. And I think when we were last together in March, we didn't have the information to vote on that conceptual plan, which is, in particular, talking to the planning board because they are part of this, and maybe it was me, but I want to make sure that from the ZBA perspective, and I know Emily can't necessarily speak for the ZBA, but I had the impression that there were still maybe some open issues on the zoning. It would be,
Let me add to, I think there are, and I was not at the discussion that's been referenced, but my experience with Emily is that she does not commit to the zoning board agreeing to variances or even saying, it's likely to be granted. And particularly, there are new people on the zoning board who may have their own views, so I know she's very careful about that. And variances at this time are not easy to get, and they're rarely granted. So if you are depending on variances, that process needs to move forward, so you understand how realistic that is.
I would suggest that it would be a good idea for, once we're at the place where we can make that conceptual plan approval, that this could come on an agenda.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely,
kind of the sooner the better, but
Yeah.
I think it would be to all of our interests to go through the second floor and let our team help and provide input, and then let it come here so we can make that vote, which is a kind of a requirement of the lease. And then that's a way to kind of commit to memory that we've all agreed on the concept, which also feels like a good idea, because on this very long project, people change. And I think that will help, that'll just help it continue to move along.
Okay, questions from the public on the HMC lease renewal? Any further comments, Stuart or Logan? You set?
Nope, other than to say thank you.
Okay, so the idea is we'll try to get something on the calendar after the first of the year, we'll put together a group.
So shall I reach out to Joe directly, or, very good?
But two things. First, really reaching out to Michelle, and she's the one who's coordinating
Yes.
all this. And second, so my understanding is that we now have an automatic extension through December 31st of 2020 for the Phase 1 term. And under the current lease, that's it in terms of extensions.
That's right. And we need to make a finding, because the extension is contingent on the fact that the approvals that are reflected in the lease have not yet been attained, but are obtainable, is
Okay.
what I understand it. So I'd accept a motion that the board make the following finding: pursuant to the terms of the lease between the town of Hingham and the Hingham Maritime Center, section 2.2.1, Romanet, that the sewer approvals and the wharf improvement approvals are not yet obtained and cannot be obtained by the end of the Phase 1 term, but may still be obtainable, such that the Phase 1 term shall automatically be extended for 1 year.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All is in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Discussion of a potential easement in connection with the CPC application for the Benjamin Lincoln statue. I see Bill Ramsey and Sevi and Gary, thanks for being here. Sevi? All All right, so before I recognize Mr. Ramsey, who is here to talk to us about an easement in connection with a CPC application for the location of the Benjamin Lincoln statue, I just want to sort of set the stage for what we're doing and why we're doing it. Town meeting is actually the entity that, that will convey or accept interest in real property. They will do so by authorizing but not requiring the Board of Selectmen to enter into a transaction to accept an easement, for instance. And so in that role, you know, a Board of Selectmen would then consider an approval by town meeting and decide whether or not to act on it. As a precursor to any applicant for CPC funding on town-owned land, the Board of Selectmen goes through really a procedural vote to authorize that application to continue. And that's essentially what's happening here. So the town doesn't yet have an interest in real property at this site. And in order for the project to move forward, the town would need to have an interest in real property at that site. That would be an action by town meeting that would then come back to this board to fulfill or not the terms of that vote. The authorized but not required language would allow the Board of Selectmen to consider the specific details of the acceptance of the easement at that point and make sure that that is in the best interest of the town before casting the vote. So, so I really am interested in confining the discussion tonight to the easement, as you and I talked about, and that in part is because this board doesn't want to get in the way of CPC conducting its own analysis of projects that should or should not move forward. So in other words, I don't feel it's appropriate at this stage of the game for the Board of Selectmen to have their thumb on the scale for any particular project. That analysis belongs to the CPC and then would come back before us for approval on the merits of the project. So this is a procedural hearing tonight on whether or not we would take essentially a non-binding vote that if town meeting were to grant us the authority to act, would we so act? Mr. Ramsey.
Great, thank you. So I want to begin by thanking you, Karen, for getting us on tonight and for the board for hearing us. I know your agenda was pretty packed, so appreciate your time tonight. So as Karen laid out, so I'm involved with the initiative to erect a statue to Benjamin Lincoln in town. I've been at it with Alec and Sevi and others, Gary Torner, Dick, committee members here as well, for about 2.5 years. We're in the midst of the CPC cycle at this point. And as Karen said, I'm not going to talk about the merits of the application. And the CPC has put a requirement on us that the Board of Selectmen weigh in on the easement before we can be considered for moving forward with funding before them. And their vote is in January. I believe it's the 14th or 15th, right around there. So we're really here tonight just to ask the Board of Selectmen to weigh in on accepting an easement. And it wouldn't fit on the easel, but I can kind of show you what the building's gonna look like. I know you're all familiar with the property. The property is at 6 Station Street, the old settled glass building. The easement, and this is just to show you where it would be, the easement would sit back here on this part of the property. It would be the dimensions, you have the dimensions in front of you. I'm gonna have Sevi speak more to the dimensions, that's his area of expertise. And, you know, the landowner, developer, Matthew Falconeri, is fully on board with the project. He's been, you know, wonderful to work with, very enthusiastic. In fact, I, you know, corresponded with him today just to confirm he's okay with everything moving forward. He very enthusiastically said that he is. And so what we're asking you tonight is just to put us in the position where you would accept it, subject to obviously the town meeting vote, and that would allow us as an applicant to move forward with the CPC funding cycle. So with that, I'm going to have Sevi speak more of the dimensions of the easement, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you.
What I've passed out is Sevi Strikovsky architecture. This is a plan of Station Street, North Street, the building, which is under construction, 6 Station Street, and a space at the notched out corner of the building, which opens up to the intersection of North and Station Street, and which we've always considered a place we could have a sitting area as something that enhances the whole pedestrian experience going from downtown to the harbor, which is a goal of the planning board. And then the opportunity came along with Bill and Alec and Gary and others suggesting that this could be an ideal location for a statue of Benjamin Lincoln, our most famous citizen. So it seems an ideal collaboration between the statue and the building. And our proposal is that the building, because there's a 10-foot separation between the sidewalk easement, this brick color shows a 5-foot wide sidewalk, and then the building is set back approximately 10 feet from that. So the statue, and in working with Matt Falconeri, who has, by the way, sold the retail space as well as 2 units
That's
up above.
fantastic.
So
Wow. Wow.
it's a very attractive piece of real estate already. And he wanted to be sure that the retail owner was happy with that. But
Yep.
what this statue would do would align with the building on North Street and on Station Street, and would create a defined space which would not interfere with sight lines. There'd be a space for a bench, so a very meaningful piece of town's history, and really to have public sculpture. It's a critical part of developing a real village feel with some meaning. So this shows the location of the statue.
Where is it? It's the square at
The
the,
square with the circle is the statue. It would be a 7-foot high. You want it a little higher than a life-size, so that it wouldn't block the view of the retail windows on that side. And further along in the statue itself is a work in progress. We're working with Susan Lurie on that, but this shows how the statue would sit, about the scale it would be in that corner by the building. And then we're looking at various gestures and character of Mr. Lincoln, who was a unusual looking character, so.
I think
He
Susan
wasn't
Lurie,
exactly
Susan
a
Lurie, yeah, I think he'd
Charlton
be very,
Heston.
I think
But-
he'd be very happy with her
But,
depiction of
yeah,
him.
It's gonna be interesting to develop a statue. Anyhow, that's the easement. There seems to be space. It seems to be very appropriate.
Do you have the basic,
Location.
basic dimensions, Sevi?
The base would be 4 by 4,
Okay.
4 feet by 4 feet, something like that, very low key, and he would be 7 feet.
And the easement around it would just sort of
Well,
accommodate the 4 by 4?
He would encroach on town land. See, the sidewalk is quite wide at that point. So the easement would be from part of the statue back into the corner of the building, and I think
So it's just that little tiny triangle?
that little, well, the easement would be the whole park. The light orange color would be the dimensions are 17 feet by 10 feet by
I see,
9.5
okay.
feet.
so the easement encompasses a portion of the statute plus the park area. And then,
Plus the park area.
right,
That's
and then the
correct.
statute is the easement portion plus town land.
Exactly. And all that town land and the easement would be paved by the developer. So it would all be brick paved.
So do we need to give, yeah, we would need to give special, I think, we'd accept the easement, but I think we'd also need to,
To give permission to put it
Give-
on town, in the town layout.
yeah,
That's the first I'm hearing that it was gonna be outside of the easement.
yeah.
I don't
So what-
know, Karen, exactly what form needs to happen there, but that strikes me as another potential approval process that you guys would have to go through. I don't know what it would look like exactly. I gotta talk to John Coughlin about that, I think.
But I think for purposes of moving forward, the CPC just needs to hear that this board would consider, not binding ourselves to do it, but that we would consider accepting the easement.
Right,
Well,
but the
two-
question is
Two
that,
things now. We'd consider accepting the easement, and that we would be willing to work with the applicant for permission to use
Right.
the town layout.
town layout.
I think that, maybe it's just that simple.
Yep. Because, I mean, again, it really is a non-binding indication, because we need, well, particularly with respect to the easement, because the easement is an action that must be taken by town meeting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, Mr. Lindner?
Hi, thanks for recognizing me. Larry Lindner, 22 Water Street, current chair of CPC. Karen, I think you may have answered a CPC question at the beginning. The committee was under the impression that to be allowed to vote on the project, there already had to be a written and signed easement between the owner of the land and the town. But I think what you're saying is the way the process works, if you give the applicant permission to move forward on something that would happen on town land, the easement would potentially happen down the line, and all of the wording and the pieces of the easement would get decided later if the selectmen wanted to move forward on the town saying, yes, you can go ahead on it.
Yeah, I think what we're saying to you tonight is, should we vote, should we take this non-binding vote to endorse the consideration by town meeting of an easement in this location, and that that this board's saying, we would exercise our authority as authorized by a town meeting to accept an easement, again, assuming there were no defects in the easement, that the project could move forward. But the way it's a little chicken and the egg, right? The way property interests are dealt with in the town is that is within and only within the purview of town meeting. And so the way this needs to progress is we would potentially give you the procedural thumbs up tonight to say, yeah, we would allow this to progress to town meeting. Town meeting could decide that they don't want to accept this easement, and then the project is stalled.
But there doesn't have to be an actual easement in place.
Are you asking for? So
there doesn't have to be the terms. I understand that an easement could not be in place unless the town voted that they were okay with that, and then it came back to you guys and you deliberated and then maybe said, yes, we accept an easement. CPC was under the impression that the language of that easement had to be in place and actually signed by both Mr. Falconeri and the town before we could even.
I think so. CPC over time, I think, has improved their procedures and their application process and their level of detail. And you and I talked earlier in the year about practices and procedures that CPC has put in place to make sure that you're not spinning your wheels with respect to projects that can't move forward. So there is no requirement by this board or by town meeting that for an application to be considered and moved forward to town meeting, in this case, that an easement had been accepted by a prior town meeting. What I do believe, however, is no CPC monies could be expended unless and until the town meeting votes to accept the easement and the Board of Selectmen, because the way town meeting votes to accept the easement is they tell us, we think you should accept the easement, you evaluate the details, and you sign off on it. So my understanding is there could be no allocation of CPC funding to the project until that step takes place. But I don't believe that there is a statutory or bylaw impediment to you advancing a project to town meeting pending this approval. So I think part of what potentially your consideration is, does it appear realistic to you that this project could move forward. And if this board were to vote tonight to endorse the process continuing, I think you have that's one piece that might inform your answer. You know, you could decide that you view this as being too speculative at this point, and that would be something that would hinder, would hinder your ability to move the project forward. And when I say you, I mean the entire CPC board. But I guess, Larry, in my mind, there's no hard and fast requirement that those pieces all need to be signed up. There just needs to be, I think, a path to get to those approvals, and those approvals do need to be in place before any money is expended.
Yeah, that I understand.
May I ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure.
Is the intent that an easement on this would be put forward for consideration by the 2020 annual town meeting?
Yes.
So,
Need a warrant article.
so there would be a warrant article for this so that the funds could be expended
In the next cycle.
in
In
calendar
2020.
year 2020?
That's
Okay.
correct. Well, assuming, right, that
Yes.
it comes back to this board and there'd
Yep.
be an approval of the
Thank you.
easement. Yes.
So the process in your mind would be, if the selectmen say, we're okay with there being in the warrant, that the town votes that they would be okay with an easement, CPC could decide to go forward and make a recommendation to move the project down the road. Then town meeting votes on it. Let's say town meeting says, yes, we're okay with this easement. Then it comes back to the selectmen, and they work out with the owner of the land. And it could be that everything is hunky-dory and it's fine, or it's not going to work out, and that's the wait period. Okay.
That's exactly right.
And that would happen before July 1, 2020?
No, it would happen, shortly after town meeting, I would think. I don't know that it would be in place by July 1. I think it would need to be in place, the easement would need to be accepted before you wrote a check to pay for the statute. And frankly, before any contracts could be signed.
Sure.
That contemplate.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. You know, the flip side of it is, if we voted no tonight, I think that informs you that at least on this piece of the process, the selectmen are saying, well, we don't think this should move forward to town meeting.
But CPC doesn't have to worry at this stage of the game,
No.
however you vote, what the language of the easement is and that there is an easement. That's
No.
not our concern.
No, I think what CPC needs to understand is that the pieces would be potentially in place, or at least put before the bodies that need to consider it before any money is expended by CPC.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks for your question.
Do we just have a sense, timing-wise, like, let's just say town meeting's April 20th, right? And the easements, town meeting votes yes. Is there any, procedurally, are there any steps that have to happen? I mean, how quickly could this board accept an easement?
I would think at that point you have authorization for, I don't, that
Is
doesn't
there
have
like
to
any-
go to
is-
the,
is there any-
that's not a zoning,
So
article.
does it have
doesn't
to, for
go to
example,
the
does it have to go and get approved by the AG before the selectmen can accept an
My
easement?
understanding is no.
Okay,
So, you'd have authorization. It would just be a
So-
procedural vote for you guys at that point.
okay, thank you.
Questions, Joe?
Well, I think it's more than a procedural vote at that time. It's a substantive vote, because this board would not be binding a subsequent,
Right.
Yeah, at that point,
Board.
it's a
Yes,
substantive.
Yes.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's right.
And that, the board is expected to exercise its discretion in evaluating the terms of the easement. That's
Right.
why we're authorized but not required.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Any other questions?
So in terms of, what I heard is that there's no expectation that sightlines will be impeded for traffic flow, for when people are pulling up Station Street, they want to make a right or a left. This would not adversely impact the sightlines?
Correct.
And-
Correct.
It's set back at 12 feet from the curb.
The one thing and I'm not sure, I haven't talked to you guys about this, but I don't know that that issue has gone to the traffic committee, for instance.
Sure.
I mean,
It has not.
Right, so that's the kind of thing.
Final design
Yeah,
should be
exactly.
made to the
It's a little
zoning
premature for that, but we.
Right, so that's the type of issue that
Yeah.
may cause a subsequent board to say, hey, maybe this is not the right move. But at this point, we'd be saying, proceed with CPC. Yep,
Thank you.
yep.
Further questions, Mary?
No, thank you.
So, did you have? Oh, so one other question I guess I had was, well, there were two questions I had. You know, you sat through, the DPW budget, so we take on these parks and monuments, and then we take on responsibilities for upkeep and maintenance. And I guess I've heard two different things. The application suggests that, that this statue would be maintained by the owner of the building and the proponents of this application. I'm just wondering how that works and who is gonna take care of the statue, or does it go on our list of monuments, or how does that?
Yeah. So,
Just before you answer, it's not just that, it's gonna be the whole area, the park bench.
Right.
Who's responsible for that? Because typically, I thought if
that
we
easement.
accept the easement, the town would be responsible for that.
So yeah, that's a good question, and I think Mary might have raised this last year about the maintenance of the park. I don't think there's gonna be a lot of maintenance to it, you know, it's gonna be
It's all
brick.
hardscape?
Yeah, it's gonna be brick. As you know, Matt Falconer's offered very kindly to make an in-kind contribution to us to do the brick, to lay the work, to oversee the work. So it's gonna be well done, well maintained. The sculptress we're working with is world-renowned. She understands the importance of how she creates the sculpture to make sure it's maintained over time. I think we would probably put some money aside for maintenance purposes. Other routine maintenance, the committee proponents would commit to shoveling, helping out any way we can. I've been at this 2.5 years. I'm very passionate about it. I live close to it. My family and I would commit to maintaining it as well, whatever we can do.
It just, and I appreciate all that, Bill, as sort of an ongoing matter, though, to Joe's point, I really feel like this then becomes the responsibility of the town. Like, we've accepted the easement.
Oh, understood, yeah.
And, you know, I would agree with you, it sounds like sort of low workload, although, you know, the statue itself, like we've seen with other monuments around town, you know, the coping and the base, you know, all that stuff needs to be maintained. The location close to the harbor with the salt air, you know, I just think we need to be realistic about, over the long haul, over the life of the statue, you know, who's gonna have responsibility for it, and I think we need to be clear about that.
I mean, in biblical times, you might be able to give us your firstborn, and,
And he can shovel, or she can shovel.
Well, yeah, he
so-
will be shoveling soon, I can tell you.
And again, it's, you know,
Yeah.
I appreciated Karen's comments about not wanting to get into the merits of the project, but when we accept an easement, right, we are accepting responsibility for the care and custody of that land. So that's another layer that is a consideration for tonight's vote and for down the road when and if this comes before us for a vote on recommending the project.
And then the other question I had for Susan was just, you know, liability, you know, who's insured, what, if there's a trip and fall, if somebody's climbing up on the statue, or, you know, I don't know, playing around on the bench, you know, what additional liability do we have? And, you know, it sounds like we'd have some anyway with this location, because it would be on town property. Susan said, you know, an injury on an easement accepted by the town would be covered by the Torts Claims Act. So, you know, I don't think this greatly expands our exposure, but it is, to Mary's point, it's another attribute of accepting the easement.
I should have asked this before. Abutters, neighbors, have you received comments, or are there people who are?
Yeah, they have, very positive. The abutter to the left and right, think it's a wonderful idea. I love the location, love the idea of it. Asked me a lot about the history of the individual. Everybody's been very enthusiastic about it. Nothing but positive.
Larry, did you have another question?
Sorry, I just wanted to make one clarification on behalf of CPC. I came to the meeting tonight to learn if we were allowed to vote without an easement in place yet, and the answer is yes. I don't want it to be misrepresented that if the Board of Selectmen vote to allow this to proceed, it predetermines how CPC is going to vote. I don't know how we're going to vote.
We agree with you.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
and I think that's a really important point to make. I tried to make it fairly inarticulately at the beginning of the meeting, but I heartily endorse that approach, Larry.
Thank you.
And just building on that, if we vote affirmatively tonight, it does not determine how the board would ultimately vote about whether or not to accept the easement.
Understood.
Yep.
Any further questions or comments?
You know, we've had procedural votes on CPC during the year to advance an application, to, you know, this to me is just a variation on that theme, which is a procedural vote to allow it to continue through the vetting process, to give
Right.
the CPC the independence of making recommendations, and this board the independence on whether it agrees or disagrees with the CPC recommendations.
Exactly. Yep.
So I do think, it's too bad Susan is in Newbury, I do think that we need to give in order to cover ourselves for CPC, I do think we need to maybe tweak the language of the vote to include, should this move forward, to include working with the applicant on the use of town land for a portion of the statute, right? Right, because it's in the town right away.
Yes,
So you can't just put it there.
that's, I would think the way you worded it earlier
So
would
if you,
work.
like, if, forget the easement, if this were all town land, Bill, we would have had to take a vote, just like we, you know, I think we took a vote in connection with Canterbury Cemetery, because Andrea wanted to put forward a proposal to clean up Canterbury Cemetery. She had to come to us for us to say, yeah, that's our land, but you can move forward with that. So,
I would definitely add that language about the right-of-way.
did you write it down?
I did not, but it was good when you said it.
Darn it.
Who would we be working with? It's the proponent, or it's not?
Where are you?
Well, so Andrew and I talked about this. So the proponent, obviously Alec and I are the, de facto chairs of the ad hoc committee, the citizens involved, but the historical commission is kind of a co-proponent, because if we do receive CPC funding, obviously the CPC can't write a check to Alec, and I would have to be the historical commission, who's already endorsed the project. They've already given some funds through Greenbush. So my conversation with Andrea as of yesterday was that the historical commission would be joining us.
Okay. What about if I said something like, Board of Selectmen would consider accepting the donation of an easement and to allow for the use of adjacent town-owned land for the purposes of creating a park with the Benjamin Lincoln statue if and when town meeting something like, with respect to the easement, if and when town meeting approves funding for the project and town meeting approves acceptance of the easement.
So
Or maybe,
it's town meeting acceptance of the easement, or authorizing us to consider it, and also approving the expenditure of CPC funding.
yeah, that's what these two things are trying to
Right.
say. And I don't know that town meeting approves the acceptance of the easement. They don't, they authorize but do not require the Board of
Right.
Selectmen to
Okay.
accept the easement.
When John gave me that language earlier, he was driving. But,
I don't want to know that. Hit it, hands-free, Bluetooth, right?
Right.
but yeah, that's a nuance that he probably,
Board of Selectmen would consider accepting the donation of an easement for the purpose of creating a park with the Benjamin Lincoln statue if and when town meeting approves funding for the project and town meeting approves, well, we can fix that. And,
Let me give it a shot.
okay,
So, tentative motion here, that the Board of Selectmen would consider accepting the donation of an easement for the purposes of creating a park with the Benjamin Lincoln statue, if and when town meeting approves funding for the project, and town meeting authorizes the selectmen to consider, but not necessarily require them to accept the easement, and would also consider working with the proponent to utilize adjacent town land to accommodate the statute.
To accommodate the park in the statute, or just
It's
accommodate
it's
the
just the
statute? It's just the
statute, because the statute's intruding into town land, not the park.
Okay.
Second.
Where'd Tom go? He's supposed to write this down.
I'm gonna get some water.
We'll go back. We'll review the clip. Are you satisfied with that?
Yes, wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you for your help.
There's been a motion and a second, or is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Happy
being here
holidays,
tonight.
everybody. Thanks for your help.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And Sevy, this is really
Sevy,
very
the
helpful.
materials were really helpful.
Yes.
Thank
very
you.
Thank you.
helpful.
Thanks, Larry.
Thanks for being here.
I noticed the likeness of you when I was looking at the statute.
I'm gonna say, it's a very, I feel like it's a very, I think it's a slimmed down version of
Mr.
Benjamin Lincoln, yeah.
Yeah, but he's got Sevy's glasses, I don't know.
Okay. Okay, we have a few votes to take. We've got some appointments, or an appointment to make. Want to go to the votes first?
Want to do next on the agenda is the appointment?
Okay.
So Kevin is here for the golf carts.
Oh,
if you
Okay,
want.
why don't we do that one?
Or the golf.
Okay.
Kevin?
Good night. So we have a contract in front of us to sign with Evergreen Golf to purchase 3 simulators at South Shore Country Club. I know we've entered into lease agreements in the past, and tonight you are proposing that we actually purchase the simulators.
Yes, that's correct.
Maybe take us through a little bit of,
Yes, so we've been in the simulator business, golf simulator business at the South Shore Country Club for just a little under 10 years. We've been in an arrangement that's been kind of more of a cost share arrangement where we pay them by the hour that the machines are on. We generate about $72,000 of revenue last year, and we paid Evergreen Golf about $40,000. It was 38 and change last year, about 44,000 the year before. So by purchasing these, it's about $4,500 to $5,000 a year that you'd have to do a upgrade to keep the equipments up to date, to keep the equipment. And what this would do is essentially, we would keep the bays that are in there, would keep like the structure, the metal structures, but all the electronics and everything would be brand new. And by purchasing them, it would be a 2-year payback for us. It'd allow us to basically make this particular business in our portfolio a profitable business, where currently it's really a service. We're not really running at a profit. So, in 2 years, it would allow us, obviously we'd be able to, because we've paid off our irrigation debt, we'd be able to pay for this in our budget this year. So we really had about $40,000 set aside to pay for the services this year from the company. And essentially what, we really just need to come up with is another, $48,000 for this. So, having looked at it, in all the different businesses that we do run up at the South Shore Country Club, I think it's important to try to get them all as profitable as possible to be able to, looking forward to try to help us with our capital expenditures that we're going to need going forward. So with all that, we put it out to bid, and we had 2 bidders, TrackMan, which is another industry leader in the simulator business, and Evergreen. Evergreen was about came in at $98,000 originally, and TrackMan came in at $131,000. So we went back and negotiated we got it down to $89,010. What the difference was is that he was providing for the upgrades for 3-year period, and we were able to negotiate that out. So we would just, get it down to 89. So we'll still have to pay for those $4,500, but I wanted to make it as affordable for us as possible.
in the short term, yep.
Right, in the
Yep.
short term.
Okay.
So was it $10 to cover batteries, or what was it?
I don't know, but it's.
They're really sharpening their pencil.
Exactly. So, but this was $10. So I think, for the long term, it's important for us to be able to provide it. And the other thing is too, it makes it, the South Shore Country Club, more of a year-round business for not only for us, but also our vendor partner at the restaurant. And it allows us to do more dynamic pricing during the day. Also, now that when, say, the Hingham High School comes and plays golf, they have the boosters paid for it. We were only charging them the fee that the vendor was paying, which, you know, that we had to pay the vendor. So now, if we do pay $20, we get to keep that $20, and we get to do, you know, during the day, we're able to, you know, lower prices and do things like that, do more lessons. The software is significantly better than what we had previously. So I think all in all, it's going to hopefully generate additional revenues. This year might be a little bit slower because we haven't been able to take as much advantage of December because we're just getting going. But I think in the next coming fiscal years, we should be able to generate additional revenue.
Yeah, no, I think it's an exciting improvement.
Okay.
Very.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a couple questions. So are we purchasing what's currently there or something new?
A little bit of both. So because we already have, Evergreen was the company that was there already.
Right.
So some of the metal structures and if you've
The
ever
housing
been there-
is-
the housing of it is gonna be staying the same. But as far as the computer and all the electronics and all the software, all that is gonna be new. So the sort of the guts of it is gonna be, but the structure and all that is gonna be staying.
And are we going to have a maintenance contract associated with this?
Yeah, so the maintenance contract essentially is just the upgrades. They do provide, in the contract, they do provide customer support for us, and we have an individual that will be able to provide, if there are any issues or things of that nature, that they'll provide. I think it's a 1 year. It was written in the contract, 3-year guarantee.
Okay. And how has this project affected the golfers' handicaps?
You know, it hasn't helped mine.
Money back.
Although it is a funny story, the Harbor Meteor was doing a thing on the country club last year, and the gentleman doing the profile on the country club actually got a hole-in-one
No way.
on the simulator on the 7th hole at Pebble Beach. So, and we do have Beth Page. Beth Page Black is another course that we're added. So there's about 40 different courses that you can choose from to play.
That's fabulous.
I'm willing to bet he tells everyone he got a hole-in-one at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Seventh
And he
hole at Pebble
leaves off the
Beach.
simulator, right?
Exactly.
Questions from the public about the Evergreen Golf Simulator purchase? Seeing none, I would accept a motion.
I'll make a motion to sign the contract with Evergreens Golf to purchase 3 simulators at the South Shore Country Club.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Kevin. All right, you want to go in order? We'll do appointments, and then we'll move to the rest of the votes.
So I think we have an opening for an alternate architect for the Historic Districts Commission. And I know we've received a statement of experience from Tracy Shriver that I think is quite acceptable. So I would move to appoint Tracy Shriver as an alternate architect of the Historic Districts Commission to fill an unexpired term ending June 30, 2020.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, contract with Mass Pavement Reclamation. Randy is not here. Maybe we probably should have done it when he was here, but fairly straightforward. So it's an extension of the existing terms. Doesn't require us to buy any specific amount of paving, right?
That's right.
Equipment rental and labor services, just puts them at our disposal if we need these services.
That's
and
right.
And it provides a constant price.
Until such time as we decide to rebid this.
Yeah, okay. Questions?
Nope.
I'd accept a motion to approve the contract extension with Mass Pavement Reclamation for equipment and rental labor services, BIS, #Equip18 through December 31, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
All's in favor? Aye. Okay. Entertainment licenses. Chief, are you still talking to me?
He's gonna dance up here.
Just gonna help me now.
Hey. So we were trying to do something a little bit different with respect to the entertainment licenses in the shipyard area, because we've got particularly outside, kind of overlapping venues, and we've got, it's different than a lot of other places, because it's mixed use, so you've got neighbors above some of these restaurants, and we just wanted to make sure that we weren't favoring any particular business, we were protecting the neighborhood, we were making sure that if there were complaints that could be dealt with, and that the merchants were working cooperatively,
Yes, yeah.
particularly with respect to outside entertainment. So, maybe
Well,
just-
basically, I think we looked at, in review of this, I think, at a recent application review, there was an issue that came up with the entertainment license because there were concerns over possible noise in the area by the residents. And I think since permitting mixed-use areas such as the shipyard, there's a density and a proximity of the business and the retails, which makes it slightly different, and it's a condensed-in area. And our thought was we wanted to be careful not to have them all compiling on top of each other and having the noise be, escalating. We met with the representatives of the Albanova, the SAPA group, the Trident group, and everyone was very compliant and cooperative with us, and they really wanted to remain good neighbors. They also realized that it's in their best interest in coexisting with the neighbors in sort of as they sort of put it, that a symbiotic relationship, because if one restaurant does well, then they all do well, and if they get along with the residents, hopefully their business will improve. So the owners definitely want to provide a positive, they're looking to provide a positive dining atmosphere and a pleasant group interaction for the patrons. And when you actually think about it, loud music interferes with that type of atmosphere. That was a big discussion on the issue of noise. And, sometimes myself, I can speak of, I don't really like going to some restaurants because I can't hear the people next to me. So if I was going to go listen to rock and roll music, I would go somewhere else, or just go for that sole purpose. That's not the venue they're trying to portray down there. So many of them expressed interest in providing their business the flexibility in programs to give them different options. And I understand that every business is slightly different, and they want to fit those hours into what suits their clientele best. So there were some different time frames that people were looking for. We talked about those. I know we had a tendency to want to standardize some of them and provide an equal, because if we have other applications coming in, we want to be able to fairly treat them. After involving all this and really going over this, I really found out that basically the way the licenses are written, anytime we have issues that arise at a place like this, we have the ability to bring them in and talk to them and revoke the license if need be. So everything is in place. I had lengthy conversations with what hours, and everyone has assured me, even though they have a variety of hours to use, they're going to be limited in scope. In other words, if we say from noon to 10, that doesn't mean they're going to be playing from noon to 10. There's a 4-hour limit in there that we've talked about. Not all of them are doing, and I think some of the other people, sometimes they asked about any, like, if we're going to do a special event. And I said, well, if you're going to do a special event, then you need to come in and present it as a special event, and we'll deal with that issue. I know Trident has done one for Memorial Day, I think it was. And SAPA was looking to do something for New Year's Eve, which I know we've granted with other different establishments. So I said that would be a different process that would go through for that. So I think that, one of my concerns here, and I know when the whole shipyard was envisioned, I think and Joe could probably help me with this, that there was a vision of what the shipyard was going to be, and it was that mixed-use relationship. And that was the atmosphere they wanted to create, where you had multiple uses going on, and some people like that atmosphere. The businesses like it, the residents like it. So I think this sort of meets that need of what the original design of the shipyard was, but I think there's also we have enough, hopefully have enough things in place that if there is an issue, we're going to call them. And I think I told them that if we get a complaint, it gets investigated, the officers go down there, they decide whether it's valid, not valid. And having attended many planning boards, I really like that idea of that 6-month look-back period to identify those problems on a mandatory
type basis, and if there's any of those issues that arise, or at any time issues arise, we have that right to revoke that license. So I think the safeguards are in place, and I think, you know, I think business, one of the things I think the businesses will tend to regulate themselves in a lot of ways, because if they mess it up, they're gonna lose their license.
Right. Well, you've taken a lot of time, and I appreciate you, you know, really involving the businesses in the conversations, because, you know, our goal isn't to get in the way of them executing on their business plan, but it is to make sure that we're protecting that neighborhood down there, and, you know, and we're certain of the town's rights in that
Yeah.
regard. So I've been chatting with you, I've been reviewing this stuff, I'm satisfied with where we ended up on that. Joe, do you have any questions?
Yeah, Tom, I thought I had seen correspondence with these 3 restaurants saying that this would not be taken up until January.
That was the original discussion that the chief and I had with them. It sounds like they're looking for, in conversations with the chief, to do this now with, as long as there's a 6-month look back, the chief was okay with it.
So am I hearing that they were informed that it was going to be taken up this evening?
Yes, the chief has been in touch.
Well, one of the things that happened is that, after this morning, we were still up in the air on some things, and I spoke with Tom and said, like, we're gonna put this off. I sent them back return receipts and accept acknowledges, so I got reception that everyone received the message and the proposals that I had, that we were going to go forward. And I spent most of the day on with the SAPA group, talking to them, and I think one of the things that, which, you know, after reviewing, I mean, locations are everything in the world, and how they're set up. Like Almanova's location is unique, because there's certain areas that sign would project, that they can project away from the building or out to the ocean, or the Trident group is more underneath the condos. So that's a different issue, as opposed to the SAPA group is more on the theater side, where there is no residential areas right directly above them, so
And
each one's a little bit more unique.
And Beer Works doesn't have a entertainment license?
Beer Works does not have an entertainment license, but they do have the outside theater that plays during the summer
Yeah.
till about 10 o'clock.
Okay.
So to answer your question, yes, they're aware that now that there's a plan to potentially vote this tonight, obviously depending on what the 3 of you want to do. Originally, we were going to postpone, but the chief laid out some parameters. They all said okay to everything, and I think at that point, the concept was.
Yeah, I mean, I got receipts
Can't
back,
hurt to vote.
acknowledgements back from all of them.
Again, I was not part of that discussion.
Yeah.
Well, all I've seen were the emails, there was one email saying, thank you for agreeing that it's going to be considered in January. So I just don't want
We can't,
people to,
I mean, the only thing, well, not the only action. One action we could take is to issue them an entertainment license for indoors only, but these entertainment licenses are on a calendar year basis, so if we don't take an action tonight,
okay.
Yeah.
we,
Right.
you know, impede their ability to program through the new year, for instance,
That
so.
was-
And everybody on here.
And actually, to be honest with you, one of the things that came up in the discussion, they said they usually have it just planned out 6 months in advance, because they have to get,
okay.
yeah.
So as long as you're representing to us that they're fine with this, you know, to your point, if there are some hiccups here, we can, you know, correct this letter after the fact. But I think we need to move forward, unless we only want to vote their indoor entertainment license, we need to move forward before the end of the calendar year.
I think from, actually, I think the reason for the delay was basically the SAPA group. The others were compliant, and said, yeah, we're okay with it.
Yep.
That has since been most of my conversations with them today, to make sure that we had everything done, so I'm pretty confident that there's no issues.
Okay. Mary, any questions?
No, I would just note that on the vote list, that there are 2 establishments that I don't believe are open right now. And just on the annual entertainment licenses, the 4th bullet down, the Coggeshall Group doing business as Crow's Landing.
So are they under
And-
renovation?
Well, I don't know, and so my question is, I don't know, and on the annual common vicular licenses, my understanding is that the Panera Bread at the shipyard actually was closing today.
Yep.
And so I guess my question, Tom, is, procedurally, do we exclude them from the list, or
So what
have they submitted applications?
Yep.
I just would point out that those 2 businesses,
Right. So the chief pointed out earlier that we have the ability to remove these licenses.
The entertainment license, yeah.
The entertainment license anyway, whenever we want to. So what I would suggest you do is, at least on the entertainment licenses, approve them. I'll look at that tomorrow about.
Yeah, I don't want to
Rose
create
Landing.
an impediment for anybody, but
And if they are in fact closed, then they don't need that license and we'll remove it.
Well, and I thought what we heard with respect to the award of the liquor licenses, which we voted last week, was that they were under renovation. So if in fact they're closed, then we've also awarded them a liquor license, so.
Right, another problem, yep. So
but
I'm gonna look at that
I would
tomorrow.
suggest, to Mary's point, we take the Panera Bread at the Shipyard off the list of the
Yeah, I don't see a
common
problem
vitular.
with that.
okay. Chief, thank you for the time and effort that you put into that. I hope that it means that, that next summer,
I hope so
the
too.
investment in time will pay off, and I think the 6-month look back was a good idea, and I appreciate the extra step of the return receipt on emails so that people were properly noticed. It makes it a lot easier to vote these tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, yep. I know that we were under the gun to sort of get it done for the end of the year, and I understand the
Yep.
push.
Seeing no members of the public present, I'm going to make an assumption that there are no questions from the members of the public. Any further discussion from my colleagues with respect to the annual entertainment licenses?
So we have a list here, and then the last three, Sapa Shipyard and Trident. Is the language that's attached to the chief's memo different than the language that's here? And I think it is, at least with respect to Sapa. So I don't,
In terms of the limitation on hours?
yeah, so for example, I see a restriction no larger than a three-piece live band in the letter. I'm not sure I see that in what's being proposed in the vote list.
Well, I'm not sure that that is,
I think
Pertinent
SAPA
to-
used the language live band to be reasonable volume, not heard outside the building. I'm not sure how she typed it into the,
Acoustical in nature and volume control. Why don't we add that, though? Live band to be a reasonable volume.
small vocal musical groups, acoustical in nature and volume, to perform at any of the following days. That's on the outside patio. For small vocal groups, to a DJ to perform any of the following days.
So it looks like small has been specified to be no larger than a three-piece, is what I'm seeing.
Did you write this today?
this is what I got from them. I took this off of their email.
You wrote this memo today?
Yes, yeah.
12/17/19. You know, the other thing we could do, Madam Chair, is reference a memo received by the chief today on 12/17/19, and for those three instances. Vote them with this language, but then state that they are expected to be within compliance with the 12/17/19 memo, written by Chief Olson.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know, the license content's one thing, this is sort of additional to the license content.
Yeah.
Or it's sort of our
Right.
cooperative expectation.
Tom, I like your solution, which is that we would vote as listed here, with the notation that with respect to those three entities, our vote is amended by, or the motion is amended by the memo from Chief Olson from December 17th, 2019.
And to be clear, that's for the SAPA Group, Trident, and Almanova.
Correct.
So it would really be Shipyard Ventures, Trident Restaurant Group, and Sapa Group. Okay.
Got that, Heidi?
Okay, so I'd accept the motion to renew the annual entertainment licenses as presented, and with respect to Sapa Group, Inc., Shipyard Ventures, Inc., doing business as Almanova, and Trident Restaurant Group, such licenses shall be subject to a memorandum from Chief Glenn Olson to the Board of Selectmen dated December 17, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Great job. Thanks again.
Yep. I was gonna pay a few extra dollars to have my slice.
Yeah, comment, yeah. Any discussion, I think we're gonna, as presented, and we're gonna striking Panera Bread, so I would.
Shipyard, because there's two.
What?
There's two Panera Breads listed here.
Yeah, okay. Would you like to make the motion, Joe?
Oh, you,
Okay, I would,
you'd accept
I
the
would
motion.
accept a motion to renew the annual common vitrular licenses as presented with the exception of Panera Bread, 1 Shipyard Drive, which shall be struck from the list.
So moved.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
And then we have a one-day liquor license for New Year, New You Resolutions Bonfire. So this, without taking too much time on, I know Mr. DiNapoli, who is our fire prevention fire officer, has worked with Stellwagen Beer Company, and you have also worked with them on parking and location of the fire, and, you know, I appreciate the fact that since they did want to have this bonfire, they've worked proactively with the town, with the police and fire departments to make sure that this can be done in a safe manner that the town's aware of, and that, you know, follows the rules.
I would know that I also spoke with Andrew Gallagher from the trustees of reservations, and it's actually a family-oriented event, and at 6 o'clock, they're gonna do some trail walks with guided tours, and then they'll move back to the bonfire area that's all confined and cordoned off before. So, you know, my concern was it wasn't gonna be a bunch of wild, crazy people having a bonfire in the woods. It's more family-oriented, and they will charge a fee.
Okay. Questions from my colleagues?
Nope.
I'd accept a motion to approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverages license to Michael Snowdale on behalf of Stellwagen Beer Company for New Year, New You Resolutions Bonfire to be held at Weir River Farm on January 3, 2020, with a rain snow date of January 4, 2020, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Selectmen and Town Administrator reports. No Michelle.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Joe?
This Sunday, the 22nd of December, at 5 p.m. at the Shipyard, there will be a menorah lighting, and all members of the town are welcome to attend.
Mary and I did that a year or so ago, and it's a really, really great event. And thank you for going on behalf of the board. Mary?
3 things. I had the pleasure of representing the board this past Saturday at the Voices of Democracy Awards ceremony at GAR Hall. I'd like to thank Herm Mesmer for really putting this program together. It was a wonderful gathering that, you know, had driven by Herm, many veterans in attendance. The Hingham schools and St. Paul's schools play a vital role. You know, it was a pleasure to see both Dr. Gallo and Dr. Austin there, and teachers that were involved. This year, the number of participants across Hingham grew significantly, and it just, it was, as always, a very, very nice day. I just want to mention that we're all thinking about the holidays. Those of you who have live Christmas trees, if you're interested in having the Boy Scouts pick up your tree at your house and transport it to the transfer station, visit www.hinghamtreedrive.com. You can schedule your Christmas tree pickup. You can pay online. The last thing, and I thought about bringing it up when Larry was in the room, but I didn't want to kind of go off kilter. I'm going to propose something that if Karen and Joe, if you think this is a good idea, I'd ask you to get in touch with Tom. As CPC is looking at, you know, the projects, there are a number of large projects that they're considering both this year and in the future. And I wondered if prior to having CPC make votes, it would be a good idea to have a general discussion between representatives of CPC, AdCom, and perhaps the Board of Selectmen and Tom to just sort of have a general discussion about CPC bonding. Not to make any hard and fast decisions, but I have a feeling that as CPC is making its decisions this year, that topic will come up. And CPC really doesn't have a window to get any input from us on that. Advisory liaisons are there, but it just seems to me that you don't necessarily want to have that kind of a discussion when you've got a project in front of you. And I do think that it might help inform decisions, because there are projects under consideration right now that additional phases could mean borrowing. So my thought, I don't know what the construct would be, but just a small discussion that would perhaps inform CPC before they vote, if you think that's a good idea.
No, I was sort of struggling with how to get that concept on the table, because I do think that we can afford those projects, potentially some access to the capital markets with our very favorable borrowing rate. But to your point, CPC's looking at their pot of cash, and that's, right, they're trying to stay true to that. So I think it's a great idea to explore, whether and when and under what circumstances that might make sense, so.
I'm also feeling like with debt, up until about 5-7 years ago, we never really looked at debt. And I think, we as a town have gotten smarter about debt. We talk about debt a lot. The advisory committee talks about debt. We talk about debt. It's kind of a new thing for CPC. Right. And again, if I'm CPC and I'm thinking about recommendations, I'm trying to think about, well, gee, what will the advisory committee and the selectmen think about this? So, what it might be, again, I don't know what the right form is, but maybe it's Tom convening a meeting where, the AdCom CPC liaisons, maybe one of us, one or two people from CPC, just a general discussion to tee up. Then, whoever attends that on behalf of the board could report out, similar with AdCom. I have a feeling that CPC will be making their final recommendations around mid-January, so it would be,
We need to get on the
if we want to do it, I think we should do it soon. Yep. I don't want to get into a big discussion right now, because it's not a posted item, but
No, I think it's
I'd throw it out for you to consider.
I think it's a
What I'm
great
hearing
concept.
is this is not project-specific, it's more policy.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Well, and the idea is that there's CPC cash flow that can support that debt service, and it's kind of, leveraging that cash to do as much good as we can for the town. So, no, I think it's a great idea.
Good.
Just another, you got it on your pad? Yeah?
Page 2 today.
Anything else? So I lose track of where we are date-wise and what's been reported out. I'm sure you've all read about the just fantastic news that the Foster School project was accepted in order to submit a statement of interest for MSBA funding for the consideration of a new or repaired school at that site. A lot of work by a lot of people over a long period of time, a lot of patience and a lot of dedication to the staff, Hingham Town Hall, to the staff at Foster School, to the parent community there. I think this is exciting news for us to all together take the next step forward to address that need for the town. So, more to come on this, but really, really good news. And again, really depended on a number of people stepping up and providing the kind of information that we needed to provide in order to demonstrate the need for that facility. So thank you very much. And with that, I will accept the motion to adjourn.
No, you won't.
Oh, we need the.
Executive.
Executive session, yeah, lovely. The board will enter executive session to discuss strategy with respect to litigation, because doing so in an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the town. The board will not reconvene in an open session. Roll call vote.
Aye.
Aye. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Wishful thinking, Karen.
Yeah.